Thank you very much. I usually travel with someone like that, but they're all very busy upstairs today. I have never learned how to do it. We have a very full schedule today, and we're already a little bit behind, as the governor has been pointing out. He's watching the clock and has told me we're 15 minutes behind, so we got to get going. It is my pleasure. I'm Ruth Mandel, director of the Eagleton Institute. It is a pleasure and an honor to have this group assembled with us today, and we've been looking forward to it for a long time, and it's great to see it happening. We certainly hope that this will be a day that everyone finds valuable in many ways, and certainly a day, I think I've already noticed this out in the foyer and in here trying to get the room quiet, in which people will have some fun because they're getting to see each other sometimes after a while. This is the Eagleton Institute of Politics. I don't have a very good voice for projections. Brian, stay there. I don't want you to get the impression we're not high-tech here at Eagleton, because we are, and you'll see as the day goes on, and in fact this project has a lot to do with being high-tech in the way that we envision it ultimately. It's going to happen out in cyberspace as much as it's going to happen in this building. The Institute is celebrating a 50th anniversary this year. We're doing lots of things for that celebration. Some of you, especially if you're on our mailing list, and if you're not and would like to be, we'd love to have your name and contact information today. Have been hearing about that anniversary in a big public speaker series that we launched last week, and we will be having a gala on November. Those of you who enjoy, I think everyone in this room does, New Jersey politics, the history of New Jersey politics, trivia about New Jersey politics and important issues. We're going to have some fun at our gala and play a game of political Jeopardy with some of the New Jersey political figures who have agreed to not to embarrass themselves, because I think they'll do just fine, but not everyone has wanted to take that risk. It's going to be a lot of fun. We hope many of you will join us. Invitations will be in the mail very shortly. Enough about that. Today is a day for looking back, of course, but it is also going to be a day for looking ahead from where we are. And we'll say more about that in a couple of minutes after I welcome the two people who are the reasons that you're here today, and that is Governor and Byrne. We'll probably hear, I know we're going to hear from Governor Byrne throughout the day, but Ruthie, this is a moment when I'd like to say something as the co-force behind this event. I'd love to have you say a word or two. If you want to take a chance.
All I can say is we gave it to the exact right institution and the exact right person.
That was really a word or two. I'm sorry that the exact right person cannot imitate that behavior, but I admire and honor you, and thank you for all of your inspiration and enthusiasm and hard work that's brought us to this point. Some of you may be aware that the event today, at least indirectly, results from the governor's gift last year to the Rutgers libraries of remaining papers and other memorabilia that I was going to say he had at home, but really they had at home, and the impetus for cleaning the basement may have come not just from him. These papers and memorabilia illustrate his distinguished career and add, of course, to the official papers in the state archives. After the governor decided to give these items to Rutgers, the Byrnes held a fundraiser. I know some of you attended it, to support the costs of processing, cataloging, and preserving the materials. And also, they were successful in getting the state government, through then Governor Cody, to provide some support for this effort. The bottom line is that they were so successful that the funds will allow us to undertake a much larger project that you're going to hear more about later today from the president of Rutgers, Richard McCormick, as well as from Don Linke, who is really the person who has put all of this together, and for whom I must say, in addition to acknowledgement and thanks, this is a labor of love. Working on putting the Byrne archive together and the beginning of this governor's program, starting with Governor Byrne's career, is for him a daily labor of love. You'll also hear... Stand for the cameras. You'll also hear from some other colleagues who've been involved. Our goal is to make Rutgers the leading, and indeed at this moment it is, and we hope it will remain, the only academic center in the country to encourage research, study, and discussion about the office of the governor in the 50 states, with special emphasis, of course, on New Jersey. New Jersey will be the floor and the base and the root for this, but we will be looking nationally at the executive, the state executive. Eagleton is already, I think most of you know, the prominent place for academic work about state legislatures through the 40-year career of our colleague Alan Rosenthal, and we're aiming now to add to that distinguished record governors as a logical component of our program on state politics and government. Governor Byrne has agreed to oversee our program during this first year, and at his suggestion, we've also invited Governor Tom Kean to co-chair the program. We'll be holding other events under it, and we'd be happy to keep you advised. We certainly will keep you advised of future plans. Our first priority, however, has been and is in compiling the Byrne archive, which we believe is going to be the most extensive profile of any governor ever compiled, with documents, images, videos, and web applications of Governor Byrne's career and his accomplishments. We've conducted over 20 interviews with key associates, and we're not in any way finished. These are video interviews that will be part of the archive. We need your continuing support and help to keep the project going and to expand into new areas of interest. And some of you I know have been part of these interviews, and it's been a fascinating experience for us, and I think in some cases for the individuals being interviewed who are getting a chance to look back over those years and revisit them, bring their retrospective insights. You can see some small samples today of the archive. They're displayed in this building, throughout the building, and we'll talk more about our plans after lunch. Today's event is part of an effort to build the archive. I also would like to tell you that this is, including today's event, which is being videotaped, will soon be available on the internet, so you are duly warned to watch what you say, but we don't want you to watch too carefully because we want you to be frank. This will be part of the historical record, this colloquium. We would also therefore request, you may find this unnecessary, and so it is a request now and it'll be a reminder later, that when you speak you identify yourself. Everyone in this room will know who you are, but internet viewers in the year 2050 or maybe 2,500 will want to know who you are as well. Governor Byrne has made a couple of suggestions about today's program. First, he's asked that people be frank. Were there mistakes made? Were there opportunities lost? Are there problems that we face today because something might have been done differently back then? He'd like you to be frank about these kinds of questions. Second, while it might be hard for many of you, all of us in this room, to step aside from reminiscing, he would like it very much if the discussion today be relevant whenever possible to the problems that we face today. Not entirely spend the day talking about war stories, past battles, even those that were fought well and won. How has government and politics changed in New Jersey over these years? For better? For worse? Where is the state going today? How should we face the continuing problems of corruption, public cynicism, state finances, transportation, the environment, and so forth? I want to offer just a couple of apologies before we move on. First, the program today, and some of us who, especially those of us who are academics who like to talk for 3 hours about one sentence, it's of necessity going to be a very broad overview of a few areas of the Byrne record. There's no way we can treat in a single day the many issues of that administration. The example, the most obvious example, the income tax, we could hold a week-long, month-long, semester-long discussion and argument and related to the discussion in Trenton today. We'll be pursuing some of these topics that are not dealt with today in other forums, and of course we'll keep you advised of future events. Second apology. Many, if not everyone in this audience, could easily be on the podium, and that's been part of the struggle I know Don has faced in putting this together. It's hard to recall a more distinguished group of people sitting here in the drawing room for an Eagleton event, and we're delighted and grateful, but it was painful to overlook some of the rich opportunities for inviting some people to be on the panels. Some of you might not even get a chance to talk from the audience, and what we'd love you to do is to consider putting down in writing or recording on audio or videotape some reactions, some thoughts, some additions that you would like to make for the archive. And the way to go about that is to talk to Don, to contact Don after today if you would like to pursue this so that we can add you to the archive. To save time, we are going to ask everyone to look in the materials that were distributed at the beginning for the backgrounds of our speakers and panelists, and so we're not going to do any extended introductions or biographies. With that in mind, I'm going to ask our first speaker to rise. Please welcome Governor Brendan Byrne.
Thank you. Thanks. What is it? Thanks for coming. Seriously, thanks for coming. This has been such a fun morning for me to see all of you and to catalog in my mind what you guys did to make me immortal. And part of what we're going to do, I think, today is make you all immortal. I brought with me a campaign poster from 1973. It says, "The man who couldn't be bought." And we got through 8 years, and I think the poster is still good. My son says, "Because you mumble so much, Dad, they couldn't get you at the FBI." But I don't think so. Somebody, maybe Dick Leone, told me to start with the story about how I first got into the campaign in '73, where I went to see, we did some work in Hudson County, went to see Mayor Fitzpatrick, and I knew that Mayor Fitzpatrick was going to say to me, "We won't support you unless you promise to rebuild the bridge over the whatever it was." Anyway, and I couldn't do that because I knew it would foreclose traffic all the way up the rest of the Hudson River. And I told him I couldn't do it. And he said, "Well, goodbye, we don't want you." And so it was Don Land, Kenny McPherson, and me. We went, had a steak dinner at some saloon, And I was greatly relieved that at least we had disposed of it. And we got a call or at least I think they made a call saying, mayor wants to see you at his house. So I went to his house, and he said, we're with you. And I said, I want to understand. I got the line in Hudson County. He said, yeah, I got the line. Anyway, so that was it. Now, 4 years later, I'm running for re-election, and the then mayor of Bayonne does not support me. And the real reason was because I was going to lose. But the excuse he advanced was that I wouldn't rebuild the bridge, the Bayonne Bridge. So I win the election, and the first thing I did was got in my helicopter and watched us blow up what was remaining of the bridge. The true stories really are funnier than the ones I make up. Anyway, I got, incidentally, Marilyn Berry Thompson is not here, and I think if you got a moment this morning, say a little prayer for her son who was tragically killed on Sunday. I got a letter from Joanne Finley, and she said she couldn't be here, and she's sorry because she wanted to be part of this celebration, and that she appreciated that while I was governor, I got out of the way and let her work. I thought we did a little more than that, and maybe we'll explore that this morning. But I really did get out of her way because I had never heard of diagnosis-related groups. And Jimmy Sheeran did put that together, first in the country. And actually, they sold it to Joe Califano, and they still use it in some places. I don't know what else Bush does, but in some places. Anyway, besides getting out of the way, I think there were certain basics that you go in with and certain things you want to get done. And for instance, certain priorities that you have. And I was thinking this morning of a couple of them. In the field of transportation, we started out with a commitment to give mass transit a priority over highways. And so I first of all, I got Alan Sagner, who had a similar commitment, and indeed I left him alone. I had a commitment from ultimately Governor Carey that the transit fare on the path would stay at 35 cents as long as I was governor, and it did. You remember that, Lou was here somewhere. So there are certain basic things that you start out in government committed to, and then you really let your cabinet and staff take the ball and run with actually that objective in mind, not on a day-to-day basis. Rarely did I think that Ted Hollander was quoted recently as saying, I called him up one Sunday morning at 6:30 complaining about something I read in the paper. I did read the papers at 6:30 in the morning, but by and large, we all did our thing, and I think that's Liberty State Park is there because of David Bardeen. There's a lot of clowns who got their names on plaques over there. I don't think David Bardeen does, but it wouldn't have happened without David Bardeen. Anyway, those were some of the things that are important. If you have certain principles and you start out with a commitment to those principles, And I can give you a lot of examples. I remember when I was looking for a state police superintendent, I put together a screening committee, and they came back with 3 names. And I said to them, I don't see Clint Pagano's name on this list. Didn't he make it? I said, no. I said, I've worked with him. I said, you give me some indication why? And they sort of hemmed and hawed, and finally said, he's Italian. And I said, this committee is disbanded. And I appointed Clint Pagano. So I think there are certain things you got to stand up for and fight for. And so today we're going to take a look at what we fought for, what we won, what we are still fighting for in some ways, and what we lost. There's a nice article in the Star Ledger this morning about the Pinelands. And it says that's one of our major accomplishments. I did that with the help of a lot of people in this room. I see Bill Hamilton, who kept the board open for a long time on some of my issues. Anyway, that's going to be exciting for me to listen to. What we did, where we stumbled, and why we're here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Mark Mappin. Where are you, Mark? Right here. Mark Mappin, who is Executive Director of the New Jersey Historical Commission. I'm going to ask Mark to come up now, and he's going to comment on the history of New Jersey's governors and cite some of the best and some of the worst examples.
Okay, thank you, Ruth, for that introduction. Something tells me, really, I am honored to be here and to speak before this distinguished audience, and it's really a tough act to follow, I must say. Something tells me that the technology here is not going to work. Forget it. I will just talk. That's all right, I don't need it. And so as Ruth said, I'm going to give some background on the governors of New Jersey and try to take a stab at who are the best and who are the worst. Well, there have been 73 men and 1 woman who have served as governor of New Jersey since the year 1664, when the Duke of York took the map and divided everything between the Hudson River in the north and the Delaware River in the south and called it New Jersey. One of those 74 governors, number 20 to be exact, was William Franklin, a royal governor of the colony of New Jersey. And as I'm sure everyone in the room knows, Franklin was the illegitimate son of Benjamin Franklin. And according to Don Lincoln, who should know this, Brendan Byrne once observed, he said, there are some who think William Franklin was only the first of a long line of bastards to serve. Okay. In a 1964 book, Princeton professor Dwayne Lockhart used some different language to describe the governors of our state. He said some were rogues and thieves, some were mere agents of powerful outsiders, some were amiable non-entities, adept at platitudes and evasion, who served their terms and passed into deserved oblivion. But there were others. Some were men of firmness, ability, and principle, who would compare well with any group of chiefs of state drawn from a comparable society. So what I'd like to do today is to survey how the authority of these governors changed over the centuries, and then offer my thoughts on who are the best of the bunch and who are the worst, who the bastards, who the saints. So let's start with the colonial era that lasted from the establishment of New Jersey in 1664 to the Declaration of Independence in 1776, a period of 112 years during which there were 20 governors. For the first 4 decades, the colonial governors were appointed by the proprietors in London, who had been granted authority over the land by the king. Starting in 1703, governors were appointed directly by the reigning monarch, but whoever appointed him, the colonial governor, did not have to go through the inconvenience of running for election. For most of this period, he had the power to veto legislation, he controlled the judiciary, and he could convene and dissolve the legislature at his command. All sounds fine, but it ignores the fact that the popularly elected assembly appropriated the money for running the government and for giving the governor his salary. Every colonial governor knew that London was very, very far away and that the assembly was very, very close. The assembly could and did use its power of the purse to make the lives of colonial governors miserable. One persistent source of hostility between the assembly and the governor was the whole issue of who controlled the land. Entire communities in this period were in a perpetual state of revolt against the proprietors. One historian has described the situation as anarchy, but you could more charitably describe it as the origin of New Jersey's tradition of home rule. The royal government collapsed with the American Revolution. In 1776, the last royal governor, William Franklin, was arrested and thrown in prison. The rebels wrote a new constitution declaring that New Jersey was now independent of Great Britain, drawing on the colonists' bitter memory of their struggles against the royal governor. The Constitution of 1776 reduced the governor to a mere creature of the legislature, a figurehead. He was elected not by the people, but by the legislature, and served a one-year term, although he could be re-elected by the legislature for successive one-year terms. He had no veto. He had limited powers of appointment. The only thing he had going was that he was commander-in-chief of the militia and ran the courts. 14 governors served during the 68 years that the Constitution of 1776 was in force. Well, in 1844 came a new constitution which expanded somewhat the powers of the governor. The governor now had a veto, but it could be overridden by a simple majority of the legislature. His term extended to 3 years, but he could not run for a second term. Under the 1844 Constitution, the governor could not create any agencies, which allowed the legislature to set up boards and commissions beyond his control. In the 103 years of the 1844 Constitution, 28 governors held office. By the early 20th century, many reform-minded New Jerseyans realized that the Constitution was badly outdated. But change was resisted by those who could manipulate the system, notably boss Frank Hague of Hudson County, who liked things the way they were. With a weak governor, he could manipulate. In 1947, though, the reformers won and a new constitution was adopted. A main feature of that constitution was to strengthen the power of the governor to the point where the office is today regarded as the most powerful of any governor in the nation. The governor's term was extended to 4 years. The incumbent could run for a second term. It now took a 2/3 majority in the legislature to overturn the governor's veto. The governor also had a line item veto. The 1947 Constitution created a more modern administrative structure with the governor in charge. 12 governors have held office so far under this Constitution. So that's the background, the ground rules under which governors have operated. Now let's take a look at the individuals who held the governor's office under this changing constitutional landscape, to pick those who, in my opinion, were the 3 best and the 3 worst. Now, historians like a considerable stretch of time to pass by before rendering judgments of this kind, so I will restrict myself to governors who have gone to the great beyond and not try to assess those who are among the land of the living. And I suspect you're thinking there that this is a real cop-out. Okay, it's a cop-out, so sue me. You know, I am a mere government bureaucrat, and I would really very much like to walk out of here alive this morning. Well, what are the standards for judging who is a good chief executive and who a bad one? We can borrow a leaf from those historians who have tried to rank all American presidents. Historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr. observed that what marks our greatest presidents is that they all took risks in pursuit of their ideals. Doris Kearns Goodwin said that the great presidents were those who had the gift for defining a vision, for moving people toward a direction for the future. Woodrow Wilson, who knew something about leadership, observed, "I do not believe that any man can lead who does not act under the impulse of a profound sympathy with those he leads." 2 historians of New Jersey governorship, Michael Berkner and Paul Stellhorn, observed that the best governors were those who were efficient and dynamic leaders, inspired by vision and tempered by wisdom. Dwayne Lockhart, who I mentioned, judged the success of governors on how well they were able to use political power to reach their goals. So the bad ones then, that's the good governors. The bad ones by default are those who were unwise, inefficient, took no risks, felt nothing for the people, had no vision, were unable to exercise power, and let me add, were ethically challenged. So let's start with those bad governors. Now, there are lots of governors whose leadership was weak, who regarded themselves just as caretakers, who were not supposed to rock the boat. One such governor was George McClellan, who found that the 1 or 2 days a week he spent in Trenton were tedious, he said. But you have to dig deeper to find the really awful governors who harmed the public. Now, I want to follow the example of that bedrock of New Jersey folklore, the Miss America pageant, now sadly departed from the Garden State. So we'll begin with the runner-ups before getting to the champion bad governor. The envelope, please. Okay, the second runner-up in the bad governor sweepstakes served from 1893 to 1896. Alas for him, he took office in a devastating national depression, which was bad enough. But things went from bad to worse. To be precise, George T. Wirtz, the name of the governor in question. Wirtz was a Democrat, and his problem was the Democratic state legislature. The legislature in those days was firmly in the grip of special interests, among them the racetrack lobby that sought to increase their industry's revenues by legalizing betting. This was a controversial proposal that was adamantly opposed by the majority of the state's population. Despite that opposition, the legislature passed a bill legalizing racetrack betting, and that legislature became known ever afterwards as the jockey legislature. Well, Wirtz vetoed the bill, but the jockey legislature promptly overrode his veto. In the off-year election, the outraged voters drubbed the Democrats, gave the Republicans control of both the Assembly and the Senate. Now came an unprecedented situation. The defeated Senate Democrats claimed that the election was invalid and refused to seat the newly elected Republican senators and carried on as a rump Senate. You could call this a coup d'etat, a junta, a rebellion, or any other word that denotes the illegal and unconstitutional seizure of power. Well, what did Wirtz do? Another governor might have stood up to the rebellion of the Senate, but not Wirtz. Instead, he meekly caved to the party pressure, and he recognized the Senate Democratic rebels, leaving state government crippled, a situation that lasted until the Supreme Court ruled against the rump Senate some months later. By conceding his authority to the legislature, Wirtz failed to live up to his responsibilities as chief executive. Distracted by this political sideshow, his administration ignored the problems of the depression that was going on, unemployment and poverty. It was government at its worst, and Wirtz's dismal record during his single term helped to end his party's long hold on the governorship. No Democrat was elected governor for another 15 years. Okay, so that's the second runner-up. The first runner-up in the bad governor sweepstakes is the ever-notorious Edward Hyde, a.k.a. Lord Cornbury, who served from 1703 to 1708. He was the first of the governors appointed directly by the crown, in this case his distant cousin, Queen Anne. He was supposed to usher in a whole new age of order to the troubled colony. Alas, Cornbury turned out not to be the best choice for the job, to put it mildly. He reminds me of Brownie at FEMA, if you know what I mean. After he arrived from England, he reportedly accepted bribes from all parties. He persecuted the Quakers. He set aside great portions of land for his cronies. He is also said to have from time to time fannied about dressed up like a woman. A loathing of Cornbury became the one factor that united both proprietors and anti-proprietors. Cornbury, who the colonists described as a, quote, detestable maggot, unquote, was ultimately recalled to England. Now, I have to point out that Patricia Bonomi, a historian at NYU, has argued that Cornbury has been unfairly treated, that the charges against him from accepting bribes to cross-dressing were second-hand slanders cooked up by his enemies. Maybe so, but I think that the charges, at least the bribery business, have the ring of truth. No subsequent royal governor ever faced such a level of accusation. The evidence against Cornbury survives in the form of affidavits. One is from Dr. John Johnston, a member of the proprietary group, who explained how he went to see Cornbury early on in his lordship's term, how he offered a bribe of £100, how Cornbury demurred, saying he could not accept it, how Johnston left the money anyway, how he subsequently delivered more. Johnston went on to describe how Cornbury referred to the bribe as a loan, although neither man ever expected it to be paid back. In other words, it sounds sort of like the transcripts of tapes made by a wired FBI informant, don't you think? It certainly supports Cornbury's guilt that the legislators of New York, where he also served as governor, in those days the governors of New Jersey also served as the governors of New York, that the New Yorkers wanted to get rid of him too. But the fact that there are doubts about Cornbury's guilt prevent me from naming him as the worst governor ever. So, that dishonor falls to Harold G. Hoffman. Hoffman's single term in office, 1935 to 1938, at first seemed quite promising. As a young Republican governor in the Democratic New Deal, he was mentioned as a possible contender for the presidency. But he soon demonstrated a lack of leadership. He became embroiled in a battle with his own party, led him into the hands of boss Frank Hague. He wandered off on a bizarre tangent by blundering into the Lindbergh kidnapping case. He claimed that the convicted kidnapper Hauptmann had been framed. All of this does not really qualify Hoffman for the title of worst governor. What does is the fact, which came out at the time of his death in 1954, that he had been on the take throughout his political career. Among other things, he'd embezzled $300,000 from a South Amboy bank, and he'd been blackmailed for $150,000. So those are the bad governors. Now let's turn to the opposite end of the scale, the best governors. Now I'd have to say that the competition here is pretty tough. There are a lot of able leaders, there really were, who meet the standard of vision, ability, honesty. The colonial era, Robert Hunter, probably the best of the colonial governors, and the Constitution of 1776, William Patterson, Joseph Bloomfield, the Constitution of 1844, Joel Parker, who was a wartime governor during the Civil War, did a credible job. Walter Edge, who was the governor in both World War I, and then the voters called him back in World War II. Alfred Driscoll, Richard Hughes. So the choices are difficult here, but here are my picks. The second runner-up for the title of best governor is Leon Abbott, a Democrat who served 2 terms, 1884 to 1887, 1890 to 1893. To me, Abbott seems sort of a time traveler from the New Deal of the 1940s who somehow wound up back in New Jersey in the Gilded Age. It was a period of governors subservient to the legislature, like his successor, the notorious George Wirtz. But Abbott was different. As governor, he fought against the dominant special interest in New Jersey politics at that time, the railroads, an industry that through its control of the legislature had maintained itself as tax exempt. Abbott made taxation of the railroads the central issue of his first term, and he threatened to bring state government to a halt by vetoing all appropriations until his bill was passed. He continued to fight special interests. Unlike Wirtz, he was able to sustain his veto over a move by the legislature to allow racetrack gambling. It's not to say that gambling is always bad, I hasten to add. Okay. In fact, Abbott was a master of going over the head of the legislature to speak to the people. He advanced laws to support labor unions, public libraries, better funding for public schools. He reached out to the Irish population. He fought against anti-Catholic discrimination. Astonishingly, in this era, when Jim Crow was dominant in the United States, he worked for civil rights for New Jersey's African-American population. He was a man who had grown up in poverty, and he was a champion of the working class. Abbott became known as the Great Commoner. He embodied Woodrow Wilson's ideal of the leader who empathizes with those he leads. Now, all of these people have warts. Abbott could be ruthless in political battles. He paid a price for defying the legislature. In those days, the senator was appointed by the legislature, and the legislature to attack Abbott turned him down 2 times. And he was no angel. He was an enthusiastic player in the spoil system of appointments that predated civil service reform, and he wrangled to get his salary as governor doubled to the astonishing total of $15,000 a year. But for all that, he deserves the verdict of historian Richard A. Hogarty, who said of Abbott that he was, quote, one of the ablest and most intriguing men ever to serve as governor of New Jersey. Now, the first runner-up is William Livingston, the first governor of the state and the one who faced the worst crisis in the history of New Jersey, the American Revolution. Livingston was a wealthy New York lawyer who had come to New Jersey for a pleasant retirement, but his plans were interrupted by the outbreak of the Revolution. And because New Jersey was the corridor between New York, which was occupied by the British, Philadelphia, which was the American capital. New Jersey was devastated by British and American armies fighting back and forth. Livingston, who took office under the hastily put together Constitution of 1776, often had to direct affairs of government on the run from the British Army. Now, although that Constitution, again, gave the governor extremely limited powers, Livingston effectively kept the rebel cause alive. As commander of the often reluctant militia, he provided badly needed support to Washington's army. As president of the Council of Safety, he kept civil order and he suppressed the Tories. And in his spare time, he penned dozens of newspaper essays and letters to encourage the patriot cause. Livingston was elected to 14 annual terms by the legislature, and he came to symbolize the revolutionary struggle to his fellow citizens. He was an amazing leader in an amazing generation of Americans. But now, my vote for the best governor of New Jersey ever inevitably goes to Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat. Wilson did not spend much time in the governor's chair. He took office in mid-January 1911. He was elected President of the United States less than 2 years later. But what a 2 years that was. Early on in his administration, he gave a frank statement and a kind of an offhand speech. He said, just think how often we have hopefully set up commissions with the expectation that when the commission reported, we were going to do something. Well, a great many commissions have reported and we have not done much. It is time we began to act on the reports of the commissions. It is time we began to tackle the problems which are the problems of our own life. So by cajoling and pushing and shoving, he got the New Jersey legislature to pass bills establishing direct primaries, reorganizing the school system, regulating large corporations, reforming municipal government, and providing workmen's compensation. He defied the political bosses, and he broke with tradition by going directly to the legislature to make his case. He saw himself as a prime minister. He was a great admirer of the British government, and he felt that as governor, he should really function like a prime minister, the leader of his party in the legislature. Now, it's possible to poke holes in Woodrow Wilson's record, to complain that he dashed off to the White House on a wave of popular acclaim, leaving his successors to face failed reforms. Matter of fact, critics of Wilson often say that he would get himself into these terrible fixes, and he'd have to get out of them somehow. When he was president of Princeton, the trustees and the faculty turned against him, so he jumped to the New Jersey governorship. And then in New Jersey, he finally alienated those political bosses. He jumped to the presidency. And as you know, near the end of his presidency, he got in trouble with the Republican Senate over the League of Nations. So then he had a stroke and died. So throughout his career, he seemed to try to get out of jams. But without question, Wilson was the most dynamic and energetic governor in the history of our state, a man who accomplished more in a briefer period of time than just about any governor of any state, anywhere, anytime. The professor transformed sleepy backwater New Jersey into a center of national reform. So let me draw some conclusions from all of this. It's interesting that some of the most effective governors, like Livingston and Abbott, functioned in periods when the constitutional power of the governor was severely limited. But they used their skill to transcend those limits. Now, historians have this probably a meaningless debate about whether great leaders control events or whether events control them. But the case of little old New Jersey suggests that a governor can rise above the circumstances he faces. And I would have to say that overall New Jersey has been reasonably fortunate in its governors. The good ones have been very good indeed, and the bad ones, by and large, more inept than venal. A goodly percentage of New Jersey's chief executives occupy the middle ground, neither villains nor heroes, but individuals trying to do a good job in a difficult time. Now, I began with a cop-out that I wasn't going to talk about any living governors. But now let me break that rule. You know, I make the rules, I break the rules here. So let me say that today you will examine the governorship of Brendan Byrne. You'll learn about the issues he tackled and his vision. And I think it is a fair bet that history will judge him to have been among our state's finest governors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. We are, in fact, moving to the land of the living. And in that regard, we'll call on the two people sitting to the left of the governor, Barry Evanchik and Martin Greenberg, who have been some of the closest people to Governor Byrne over many, many years. And what we've asked them to do here is to give a brief overview of his early years before he was Governor Byrne.
Thank you. I normally reject the opportunity to speak following my former law partner, Brendan Byrne. But fortunately, we had Mr. Mandel in between. And, sorry? I'm sorry. Mark Mapham, thank you. And I learned something very important from Mark's comments. I had heard the $300,000 number attributed to former Governor Hoffman by way of embezzlement. But I now understand, as a result of the fact that he was blackmailed for $150,000, that he only netted. So you pick up information. I've been asked to make it short because it is Brendan's career as governor that's the subject, I think, for today and for the time in the future while this project is underway. But from day one, and I'll come back to day one in a moment, if I had to describe Brendan Byrne in his own words, that is to say, succinctly, I would talk about a person who has a spectacular ability to use self-deprecating humor in a concise way. It was evident from my very first exposure to him and throughout our association. Best exemplified, I think, when his name was removed from the arena. And I said to him, Brendan, don't take that to heart. It's political. He said, I'm not disappointed. I was immortal for 12 years. And to those of you, if there is anyone in the room who has had a building named after him recently, just remember that immortality is fleeting. Almost 50 years ago, exactly, as a matter of fact, 49 years ago this month, I walked into Governor Minor's office as a prospect to be employed as his legal assistant. And I was hired, and I served in that capacity for about a year, and I met Governor Byrne at that time, who was the executive secretary and assistant counsel to Governor Minor. We were across the halls from each other. I was in the counsel's office, and Brendan was in the governor's office. My good luck. I took the train every day with a number of our folks who commuted from Essex County down to New Brunswick. And Brendan and I and a couple other folks had lunch one day and found out that Brendan had a car assigned to him. And so for the next several years, Brendan Byrne and I and David Satz, former United States Attorney, and David Landau, now a judge, on recall. Incidentally, there are a number of judges on recall and are sitting who wanted to be here today, who were appointed by Governor Byrne and were not permitted to be here. I speak for all of them in congratulating Brendan on his career. Don't ask me why they couldn't come. It's a ruling. It's something about politics. I don't understand that stuff. In any event, those were the years when we tried to get Brendan attuned to being governor. We knew that this was going to happen, so we put him in the back of the car, and we drove him. In fact, when somebody said, so what is it like, not to be governor? Yesterday you were governor, today you're not governor. And it's this wonderful line. He says, well, now I get in the back of the car and nothing happens. He had the opportunity to serve as the acting prosecutor because he had difficulty getting confirmed when Governor Minor designated him as a deputy attorney general in charge of the prosecutor's office. You couldn't become a prosecutor in Essex County in those days without the consent of the county chairman, and the county chairman did not, I suspect, was not comfortable with this Princeton and Harvard graduate who wore loafers and dressed like a college young man, which is what he was, and certainly did not come up through the ranks or pay his dues politically. So he was an unknown commodity. And for a county chairman to approve a prosecutor that he didn't know and wasn't comfortable with was taking a huge risk. And so he opposed him. And Brendan invited me to join him in that prosecutor's office, again, as a deputy attorney general, because none of us could work as prosecutors with an acting prosecutor, or as a matter of fact, a deputy attorney general acting as prosecutor. And there we sat and did our thing, and it was a wonderful experience. And it was in that office and his exposure to the press and to the public that he obtained the title, the man that the mob couldn't buy. I don't know if you recall how that happened. They were taping a conversation. I think it was the state police of a few folks who were involved in gambling, and that gambling in those days was one of the main areas that the prosecutor's office performed in. We had squads that were exclusively prosecuting gambling indictments. And in that telephone conversation, one of the bad guys spoke to another bad guy, and he said, "What is this with this guy, Byrne? I mean, can't we find a way to have him just, what we're doing, and nobody's getting hurt. We're running games." And then the famous line, which became famous thereafter. You can't get near him. Nobody can buy him. Now, how they knew that, I don't know. I suspect somebody made an effort at some point, and word got around. In any event, those were the days when you could be a prosecutor and an assistant prosecutor and still practice law. It was a part-time position. And Brendan invited me to join his firm. And so since then, and throughout his career, except when he was on the bench and as governor, he and I have been partners in the practice of law. So I got to know him real well. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. A spectacular human being. He left the prosecutor's office and became, as I think you know, president of the Public Utilities Commission, where I think he worked with Barry, or Barry with him, if I'm not mistaken, and Barry will discuss that with you in a moment.
He worked with me.
Worked with you. And even then, we were partners, because that was not a full-time position. He then became a judge, Superior Court judge, in 1970, and he served as the assignment judge in Morris County. And of course, at that time, that was a full-time position, and it still is, and so our partnership terminated. And the next time we talked about anything other than family and friends was when I received a phone call in 1973 from him after he left the bench for lunch or the end of the day, and asked couldn't we talk about something. And he came over to the house, and in fact, we met in his house. And he explored with me the concept of running for governor. He had been asked by certain folks if he was interested in undertaking the race. At that point in time, I was the nominee for the Senate on the organizational ticket, which was headed by Ralph DeRose. And I envisioned difficulty if I were going to be on a ticket that was competing with the ticket on which my former partner was the candidate for governor. The view of Brendan Byrne as a candidate for governor was struck fear into the organization, even though on the surface there was an aura of self-confidence. But I remember when he decided to run, as a result of the conversation that he alluded to a couple of minutes ago in Hudson County about the bridge. I thought it was an exit on the turnpike, but I think that was a bridge, as a matter of fact. And decided to run. This is not a Brendan Byrne story, this is my story. But I'm not going to have an opportunity to do this again. So I'm going to take advantage of it. The county chairman said, look, you're on our ticket, and your former partner, is our opponent. In the primary. So I would like you to do me a favor. Can you take a long vacation? In other words, don't campaign. You're going to win. Our ticket was going to win. But the top of the ticket was in doubt. And so I kind of went underground and worked, in a sense, with Brendan as a friend, but did not campaign for him and did not campaign against the ticket that I was on. And from that point on, he won and I won. And it was a joy to be able to serve with Brendan as the governor. I became chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and am very proud of the fact that from time to time I had the opportunity to sponsor legislation which Brendan was supporting and wanted to see passed. And I was honored to be able to do that with, for example, the criminal code, which was something that Brendan wanted to see enacted into law. It had been kicking around for 10 years when he became governor, and it was one of his priorities. And we moved it through the Senate and the Assembly, and it is still on the books with some amendments. So I want to publicly thank him for giving me the opportunity, as so many of my friends and his colleagues have done over the years. I'd like to finish by saying, I suppose that Brendan will never, ever be able to be considered as one of the best governors in this state, because he will live forever. God willing. Thank you.
I asked Marty Greenberg to yield back 5 minutes of his time. He declined to do it. So I have some greater time constraint than he did. My first meeting with Brendan Byrne almost didn't happen. It was sometime in 1964, I was up from Fort Monmouth, where I was serving 6 months active duty, and I had been given an interview with Mr. Byrne. It was to take place on a Saturday morning at his home on Dogwood Drive, then in West Orange. I nervously rang the doorbell, and there was no response. I rang it again, and still no response. And the third time convinced me I had somehow screwed up. This was not the day I was to be there. And head hung low, I walked back down the walk, and I was about to get into my car and go home when I heard some noise from around the back of the house. I walked up the driveway, and there in the backyard were two people, my future boss and a young kid, and they were having a catch. The young kid was Tommy Byrne, one day to be chairman of the Democratic Party. I got into the game. My left palm still stings, I can tell you, from the pitches from Tom Byrne. After that, we went into the living room and we talked. He said to me, I see you went to Milburn High School. Yes. He said, do you know Frank Close? I said, sure. He was our football coach, our baseball coach. Brendan said, I played football with Frank at West Orange High School. And then he looked down at my resume and he said, I see you rode on the crew team at Rutgers. I said, well, I was in what they called the pickle boat, meaning I never made it even as high as the JVs. But yes, I was on the crew team. We talked about some more things, and I went home. My parents asked me how the interview went with Prosecutor Byrne. And I said, I'm not sure. We talked about Frank Close, we talked about Rutgers, we talked about crew. I don't remember talking about law. It's true. In any event, there came that fateful moment some months later when I got a phone call. And I remember he said to me, I've decided I'm going to give you a shot at this thing. And I was hired to be an appellate prosecutor. I had served an appellate clerkship. And so in January of 1965, I was sworn in. Swearings in of assistant prosecutors in those days were major events. Your parents would come, your relatives, everyone. The whole office, consisting then of about 20 assistant prosecutors, the boss, as we affectionately referred to him, everyone piled into some courtroom for the ceremony. And after that took place, out in the hallway, I proudly introduced my new boss to my future father-in-law, who had come to this event. My now wife couldn't make it that day, but her father was there. And when I introduced him, Brendan turned to him and said, so I guess you're glad he's got a job. There are, I think, two people in the room who worked as assistant prosecutors under Brendan. Rich McGlynn and I, although you were not technically an assistant prosecutor,
Yes.
although you were technically, that's what I said. You were. In any event, there are three of us in the room who worked under Brendan.
And Sandy Jaffe.
Okay, now four of us. So you're using up all of my time. Is there anyone else in the room who was in the I went back, I went into the basement this morning and I found a couple of enforcers. That was the publication that we put out every so often in the prosecutor's office. And then among other things, it announced new staff appointments. I happened at random to pick two. One from September of 1965 announced the appointment of Richard B. McGlynn, seated here with us in the front row, one day to be in the Byrne cabinet and a judge. Rich was appointed. The other one I picked out at random, I assure you, was November of 1965. It announced the staff appointment of one James R. Zazali. I don't think I have to tell you much more about Jim Zazali, except that Jim Zazali, Rich McGlynn, Bill McGuire, I could name 50 people who today are in their respective arenas of prominence, and all of whom would tell you in a heartbeat that they owe what they have accomplished professionally to the man seated here on my right. It was a privilege, a joy to be an assistant prosecutor. And all of us who had that opportunity will cherish it always. Last night, my law partner, Justin Walder, and I played some tennis, and I told him I was coming down here to do this. And he said, you know, I've often thought that among the things that Brendan viewed as most important were athletic prowess. You know, I tell you, count me out on that one, but Justin said, you know, to this day, I believe someone had told him I wasn't a bad baseball player, and he said, I think that helped get me hired, and he said, I will tell you, in the middle of a major murder case, Wilson and Sinclair, Brendan called the trial judge and asked him to end court early that day so I could be available to play in the prosecutor's softball. The prosecutor's years evolved for me into an opportunity to work for him at the Public Utility Commission. He had been appointed president of the PUC by Governor Hughes, and within some days of that appointment, I was fortunate enough to get a phone call, and he said, Barry, they tell me I can have an administrative assistant. Would you like to do that? And I jumped at the chance, and off I went. It was a part-time position, but it was a fun thing to do. Now, I want you to picture a big office on the 4th floor, I think, of 1100 Raymond Boulevard, that god-awful building in Newark, which at that time housed, among other things, the Public Utility Commission and the governor's Newark office. Brendan Byrne, of course, had been a distinguished prosecutor of Essex County. What he knew about utility regulation then, I suspect, you probably could put on the head of a very small pin. Although I'm proud to say I watched him within days, weeks, become so tremendously proficient and learned about utility regulation because he is Brendan Byrne. His desire to engage in scholarship is unequaled. I remember he went over to New York and took some very sophisticated course given by, I think, Morgan Guarantee on utility regulation. And it wasn't long, believe me, it wasn't long, before meetings with all these utility magnates taking place around the big conference room were marked by his ability to outthink them and really know, even better than they did, what was necessary for New Jersey from the standpoint of utility regulation. But the funny thing, or at least among the funny things to me, in the president's office, and it was a big, majestic office. I used to take my little daughter, she was little then, on Saturday mornings, we'd go down to the office when Brendan wasn't around. I'd do some work and she could play. It took 20 minutes to get from one door to the desk. On the wall was some art, or at least some pictures. One of the pictures prominently hanging in the office of the president of the Public Utility Commission was of Dutch Schultz lying in a pool of blood on a table in a restaurant in Newark. And I still remember the looks on the faces of these utility magnates as they came in for meetings and started out by looking at Dutch Schultz. For me, the utility years, the couple of years that I was with Brendan there, evolved into his judgeship. I went about my business in the practice of law. And I remember so well, as Marty does, getting a phone call early one morning. Brendan was then the assignment judge in Morris County. Getting a phone call, and he gave me a kind of a heads up that he was going down to Governor Cahill's office later in the day to announce his resignation as a judge and to hold a press conference and announce that he would run for governor. And to paraphrase Robert Frost, that road that Brendan took that morning has made all the difference.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And also, they're great teasers for who knows what in the future, but I know there's much more from where all that came. I don't think Michael Aaron needs much of an introduction, but Michael, if you would come forward. Michael has been, he's too young to have remembered the administration, but he's studied New Jersey politics. Michael has been very helpful in our video interview project for this archive, and we've asked him today to moderate the panel on the governor's 73 and 77 campaigns. So we're going to move now to those campaigns.
Talk about the two elections that Brendan Byrne won. One he won handily, and one he came from behind and won. But before we do that, and while these people are getting mic'd up, I just want to say that I was listening to the governor earlier, and he told the story of appointing Clint Pagano, the committee that came to him without Pagano, and he said, why is Clint Pagano not on the list? And they said, because he's Italian. And Governor Byrne said, I'm disbanding this committee. It reminded me of a story I heard just yesterday. Bob Menendez told it at Bloomfield College, and I learned this morning from Mark Mappin that there was a Governor Joseph Bloomfield. I didn't know that, but Menendez yesterday told the story of Clifford Alexander, the Secretary of the Army, about 30 years ago. His staff brought to him a list of all the colonels who should be promoted to general. And he looked at this long list, and he said, there are no African Americans, he must have said blacks in those days, on this list. I want another list. So a couple days later, they brought him a new list, and on that list was Colonel Colin Powell, who he promoted to general, brigadier general, and it showed that one man makes a difference, right? We have all these distinguished Byrne-era people up here with us. I've interviewed several of them for this Byrne Archive project, which I'm pleased to be participating in. I've learned an awful lot about the Byrne years from participating in this project, and I've learned that the key slogans or phrases for the two elections were, in 1973, the man who couldn't be bought, and in 1977, one-term Byrne. Now, Dick Leone just came up to me and said, you know, those are two very different elections. You can't talk about them at the same time. I agree. I think we should talk about 73 for a little bit, and then 77, and then maybe we can mix them together. And as the governor has ordered, we should also compare these campaigns to what goes on today, because that's got to be interesting, right? Let me start by asking the governor. You said in our interview, we've done 4 interviews, or 5 now, and we're probably not even halfway done for this archive project. But you said in one of the interviews that you got to be governor by accident due to Governor Cahill's problems. In a similar situation today, would you still resign as judge to take a shot, or has it become too nasty and expensive?
Well, first of all, it's too nasty, so you don't worry about whether it's expensive or not.
You wouldn't do it?
Would not do it.
Why not? Why not?
Because it's so, I mean, you could do anything. In my first election in 1973, I picked up the paper one day, and there was a scandal involving me. And the scandal was that I was once on the board of a small insurance company, and that the insurance company, I was on the Public Utility Commission, the insurance company had bought a $10,000 public service bond. And since I was on the insurance company board and running the Public Utility Commission, that was a scandal. That's the worst they ever did to me. Now, today, oh, you would get killed. You would get killed.
Dick Leone, talk to us about the man who couldn't be bought. Was that what you built the campaign around?
First of all, I want to clear up something, and it demonstrates a word of caution to all of you. By the way, I'm glad to be here with the parents and grandparents of people I served with. Your children were fantastic, great colleagues. It's about memory, because what you're hearing is not necessarily what happened, but what we remember as having happened. And I think we promised the bridge in the first term, and we said we'd double deck it in the second. I think the unique thing about the race was that Cahill, some of the people around Cahill had gotten into trouble, which changed the dynamic. He was already in deep trouble in the Republican Party because he'd advocated an income tax and tax reform. He was a pretty courageous guy, Bill Cahill, much maligned and forgotten these days, but a stand-up guy. Reformed law and public safety with George Kogler, was really a class act. But he was in free fall, and the Democrats had a bunch of decent but conventional candidates, and then the word got out that Judge Byrne was thinking of running, and Ronnie Sullivan, and this may be a paraphrase, wrote a front-page story in the New York Times that is the best announcement anybody ever had, which was basically Brendan Byrne, comma, the man the mob couldn't buy, comma, today announced. And at that point, it looked pretty good for the primary, to put it mildly. We didn't even run television ads in the primary, so to husband our resources. So it was the governor's right, it was an unusual situation.
It was post-Watergate. Alan Sagner, you were involved in the first campaign, right? You raised money. You were the chief fundraiser for the first campaign?
I was drafted by Marty Greenberg, and I was on the committee, and R.G. Alexander was the chairman. And we would have meetings and get a budget of what we were supposed to do, and one day he came in, excuse me, and he said, I just got a memorandum from Dick Leone. I remember he had this portfolio, and he folded it over. He said, I can't operate this way with Dick Leone raising the ante every time I'm out of here. And so I ended up as the finance chairman.
Was money as important to a campaign then as it is today?
I think you have to ask Dick and Brendan that.
We didn't raise more than $1 million, did we?
We raised a lot. We borrowed some, as you recall.
Yeah.
Jerry English, where were you in '73? Were you part of this effort?
I was working for another person who wanted to be governor.
Who was that?
That was Edward Craybill, and I see Middlesex sitting there. J. Edward was the minority leader of the Democrats, and I had been the shortest term senator known to probably history, but 2 months gets you a lot. So I could go on the floor of either house at any time, and I served as assistant counsel with Dave Goldberg to the minority. The long and short of it was that I had been part of the legislative process, and then Dave Graybill said to me, I'm thinking of running for governor. I thought it's because of your charisma. Moving right along from there, then one day, Dick Coffey, and I think Jim Dugan is supposed to join us, said, there's this fellow called Byrne. And I said something like, who's he? And they looked at me stunned, like, how could you not know? Well, after I started to know, and they basically, Craybill pulled out, and Goldberg and I got handed over to the campaign, and Dick Lee charge of me. Governor, I have to tell you that I was in Vermont the other day, and I saw this sign that said, "Plumbers for Bernie." That was my job in the campaign. I did special interest groups with a fascinating array, and the long and short of it was that I was supposed to go out and get all these cats and dogs that all wanted to be part of this campaign and coalesce them into some sort of working volunteer group. Sneakily, he turned out to know something, because I did say to J. Edward Craybill, I don't know who this guy Byrne is, but he doesn't know anything about anything. I went to this debate to listen to him. He doesn't know anything about the issues. You can just wipe him out. Well, J. Edward understood something about Hudson politics, and he said, he's got the line. I'm out of here. Now, that was...
We'll get back to what he knew and what he didn't know in a minute. John Degnan, you joined, I think I recall from our interview for this project, you joined Brendan Byrne's administration in '74 or '5, but were not part of the campaign. Is that correct? But you became close enough to Governor Byrne to know why he won that election. Why did he win that election?
Why he won in 1973?
Yeah.
He's the best candidate.
Well, give us a little more than that.
I think he won because the time of the time in which he ran was the Watergate era, and he had both a career and a credentials and the reputation as somebody who was not coming out of wave of reform. He ran and won as a reformer.
And who did he run against?
Charlie Sandman of Happy Memory.
Well, maybe that's why he won, right?
Most of you in the room would remember. By the way, how many of the parents and grandparents in this room, thinking of the old Dick Leone, would associate him with a sense of humor? I used to be scared to death of him.
Yeah, well, I never was. I was never
It was my
scared.
intention to have people.
Write that down.
But remember how many Republicans endorsed Brendan in the race. I mean, Charlie Sandman was the loneliest candidate in his last century, I think. The party walked away from him. And anyone who cared about the government in New Jersey and was interested in reform was signing on to the Byrne campaign, except me. I was practicing law.
And Harold Otis, you didn't join the Byrne enterprise till 3-4 years after that.
That's correct.
You were in Newark with Mayor Ken Gibson at the
Right.
time, but you know enough to know the story of that '73 election. Why did Byrne win so easily?
I think you have to go back to the time and what was taking place and who the candidate was. I mean, you had a conservative coming out of Cape May. The man who couldn't be bought was the motto. It was just the time. And people united, Democrats united behind him along with the line.
Was this former prosecutor, judge, public utilities commissioner, was he a good candidate in '73?
He was never a good candidate.
Ever.
Actually, that's not true. He was a terrific candidate in '77. In '73, I don't think you had much fun, and I think as much fun as you probably could have had, given the nature of the race, and you were getting used to it. But you're actually you were a much better candidate with all the pressure on everybody against you.
But getting elected is hard work, and I will say that Brendan was not afraid of hard work. I mean, we would schedule meeting after meeting, starting in early and going on late at night, and he never ducked a meeting. He never refused. And
He wanted it bad, didn't he?
he worked at it, and it's hard work. Anybody who's been through a campaign know what it is day after day, hour after hour,
If
meeting
Charlie-
with people and listening to what they have to say, and he had the patience and the integrity. Of course, he sometimes was too friendly with people and would be at somebody's house at 9 o'clock talking to somebody about something that they thought was important. And Brendan was listening, and I had 8 more appointments for him that evening. And it was kind of difficult.
But in '77, Alan used to call meetings and no one came. There was only 3 or 4 of us that would sit around in the room, whether it be fundraising or policy or anything. There was
Why was that?
because they didn't believe they believed in the one-term Byrne.
Uh-huh. Let's stay with 73 for a little while. If Charlie Sandman was so easy to beat because he was a conservative Republican, and wasn't he also on one of those Watergate committees, and he was
Yes.
Nixon's, he voted against impeachment, and he was one of Nixon's champions in Congress, as I recall.
Well, he voted against hot and cold running water for migrant workers. He voted against $1.25 minimum wage. He had a record which didn't match up well with the people.
Well, if he was so easy to beat, at what point in the primary did you sense that you had a winner, or that you were a winner? That was a much more difficult enterprise, was it not?
I think it seemed superficially difficult, but it was not difficult.
Why? Who were the candidates?
Well, Ralph DeRose and Ann Klein were the principal people who stayed in the race, and Ann was, who was subsequently Commissioner of Human Services for the governor, and was running as a kind of outside the organization reformer, a role which actually probably be more effective today than it was then, because the line and organization support was still worth more than it cost you. Today, it's not clear to me that that's always the case. DeRose was Essex County's candidate, Harry Lerner's candidate, largely because Brendan was not. And the issue, though, that was on everybody's mind was who's going to clean up Trenton. I don't know if that sounds familiar to anybody. We've come a long way since then, and so this almost never comes up in contemporary campaigns.
One of the issues in the primary was this issue about Brendan being too liberal in that part of the party that didn't want him. And the person who they were concerned about, not so much as Brendan as Dick Leone. And
They were concerned that Leone was too liberal?
They were concerned that Dick Leone and Lou Caden represented part of the Democratic Party, and that many people in the party in those days were not particularly fond of, or didn't trust, or were concerned about. And that was, as I recall, one of the big issues in the primary.
It was actually an issue within the campaign, and there was, probably retell this story because you don't get to tell it very often. There was actually an effort early on to press Brendan to make changes in the leadership he'd selected for the campaign, where we met at Alan's house, and we were going to have this meeting about it, and I didn't know how it would work out.
Somebody was trying to oust you? Is that what you mean?
I didn't know how it would work out, and Brendan said to this individual, here's what this meeting's about, Jim, whether you're going to be in the campaign or not, because Dick is running it. And I don't think, if you've never been in campaigns or run them, you can know what an advantage it is to have somebody vested with the authority to run something. Even the wrong person is better than campaigns where there's not any direction. But it was a different time. We were running in an atmosphere where I think this was true of the governor, it was true of me, it was true of Lou, where we were desperately afraid of being compromised because of the corruption, because we didn't know who was going to do something or what was going to happen or how somebody would explain a meeting. I mean, I think we were probably seen as remote and difficult in part because we wanted to be. You know, to tie this into the current atmosphere, somebody the other day asked Governor Corzine what some of the best qualities Stuart Rabner had. And he ran through a bunch of things. Rabner's an immensely talented, gifted guy. But one of the things he said was, because he's Stuart Rabner, people don't even come to us about certain things. And because he was Brendan Byrne, and because the rest of us were who we were, people didn't even come to us about things. I think that's the key to understanding what makes a difference in administration.
Yeah, nobody ever made me an offer.
Jerry.
For contemporary times, I am the chair of the Election Law Enforcement Commission. This is a very, very interesting task. I find out who gives to everybody, together with my commissioner, fellow Commissioner Albert Burstein, who was the first sponsor of that bill. And so I asked that able staff, you won't believe this, that I'm the one that's showing up with the figures today. 1973, the amount spent on the gubernatorial general election was $2,150,700 and change.
By both candidates or by one candidate?
Both.
Both.
In 2005, it was 58,700,000 and change. Here's one of the
56 was
things.
horizontal.
I mean, these were the kinds of things where I'm told prior to the governor
They did spend 50.
coming in, and what Dick Leone and Alan and Lou Caden were doing was setting up for the campaign what, in fact, we talked about in that campaign, and that is, so if you get to be governor, what are you going to do? The first day that Governor Byrne came into office, they had the legislative package in place. The very first bill was public financing of gubernatorial elections, the public advocate. These were the kinds of things that we started off with programmatically as legislative council. I knew what I had to get passed. So we were doing things in a programmatic way, and meanwhile, when people would come to us and say, gee, during the campaign, Alan Sagner and all those people said, they promised me that I was going to get this job and I was going to get that job, and Brendan Byrd said so. And I said, you got to be kidding. He never promised anybody anything. And every single check that came through went through the vetting procedure that Dick Leone set up, which was that it went through the state police, it went through a vetting group to find out who is this. Now today you'd find it out in a different way. But at that time, I think this reform aspect of who's giving, who are they, who's behind it, we're finally coming around to it a long, long time later with pay to play. And that one, that history is yet to be done. It started, at least from my point of view, then.
Let's fast forward to 1977, and let me fill in the 4 years intervening by saying that from interviewing some of these people and the governor, I've learned about that time, and what I've learned is that they spent the whole 4 years trying to pass a tax, and they succeeded in the third year, and it consumed them. And they knew that it might cost them politically. And going into the re-election year of 1977, very few of them thought that he was re-electable. I think only John Degnan, is that how I remember it?
John was the most enthusiastic.
And the youngest and the dumbest. I'm not sure. I like to take credit for the fact that I thought he could get reelected. I think my attitude was really that he shouldn't run, whether he could get reelected or not, and not forfeit the party to, people who would regress it to a point where it was before he become. I wanted to go down fighting. I thought there was a chance we could win.
I think a lot of us thought if Brendan lost, all the things we'd done would be washed away.
Governor, did you think you could win, say in January of '77?
Well, in January '77?
Yeah.
What really happened, and I haven't had a chance to say this much, was I really had some doubts whether I should run again in '77, because I didn't want to pull the party down. And I looked carefully at the polls. I think John Degnan called me from Washington in January of '77. Told me he had had a meeting with Peter Hart. Peter Hart.
After Carter's inauguration.
And that Peter Hart told him that there's no way that I could win. No way. And that the polling bore that out. And so, no, I really had a concern that we not forfeit the office to the Republican Party. But as time went on, the polls showed I was going up from 15% to 17%.
You had momentum.
Yeah. And early April, Ann Klein came to see me on a Sunday morning and said that she was going to run if I did not. And that she did have one poll, and I bless her for telling me this, she did have one poll which showed that I was gaining a little momentum. And so, having had that meeting at the Princeton Club with John Degnan and everybody else, I changed my mind, or at least I made up my mind that it was worth a shot. And
The meeting at the Princeton Club. Tell us about the meeting at the Princeton Club. Who met?
Dick Leone would remember better, I think.
Yeah, I think, you know, to understand this election, I do have 4 numbers that are tattooed on my mind. In January, we did a poll of Democrats in which 63% of the Democrats said they would not vote for Brendan Byrne under any circumstance. In June, the governor was renominated with 28% of the Democratic primary vote. You could look it up. It sounds preposterous.
How many Democrats challenged him, the sitting governor?
9 or 10, yeah. On Labor Day, we were behind.
How many of those were from his own cabinet?
Sure.
Joe Hoffman. On Labor Day, we were behind. We trailed Ray Bateman by 26 points. On Election Day, he won by 18. Now, that's a remarkable year. And it was almost theatrical, the extent to which people reconsidered Brendan Byrne in the course of that year.
Okay. How did you all handle the income tax? The governor in '73, I think, had said that he didn't foresee a need for new taxes, or maybe that was Florio who used that word, but
not in the foreseeable future was our word.
Not in the foreseeable future. Okay. And so tell the story of how you handled the fact that you had broken a tax pledge. Who wants to take that?
Well, we embraced it.
Yeah. Right, it was the
We did the commercial
Right.
in the primary that we ran all year, which was basically sometimes you have to say something that's wrong in order to learn what's right, and we needed the income tax. And we ran right at it. We didn't run away from it.
Was it the governor looking at the
Governor
camera?
talking, and in all the debates, he went right at Ray Bateman. Well, if you don't want the income tax, what are you going to do? And they had no answer.
Yes, they did. The Bateman son
Well, that was...
tagged as the BS.
We're going to get there, Richard.
I've been told not to do this, but I have looked at some stuff, including some things I did in the '73 campaign. Although I'm famous for saying we don't need an income tax in the foreseeable future, any number of times I discussed an income tax, both in the primary and in the general election. And I said that an income tax had to meet certain specifications in order for me to support it. Well, that's all washed away when they grabbed onto the foreseeable future.
You know, let me just say one thing. There is a similarity between the two races, and that is that they both were about character in very different ways. The first one was about the character of a guy who could be trusted to clean up Trenton. The second one was about the character of a guy who wasn't going to bob or weave, was going to embrace the toughest issue in the state and go to the people with it. And they respected that.
Who was Ray Bateman at the time? Farrell.
Former president of the state senate.
And how was he regarded?
He was highly regarded.
Great guy.
A great guy, moderate Republican, very well respected on the outside.
By me, by the way. I respect Ray. I respect him today. I think he's one of the greatest people who ever came on the political scene in New Jersey.
So
I
what-
said that. I would, on joint appearances on television, I would say into the camera, if you want to vote for the nicest guy, you vote for him.
And then what did you say next? I mean, you had to say something
But we
else.
got some tough issues to face, and maybe you don't need a nice guy.
All right, Richard McGlynn anticipated where I'm trying to go. That's all right. Ray Bateman came up with some kind of economic plan. Who wants to tell the story? What was his plan?
He came up with a plan that he asked Secretary Simon to head up the committee.
Bill Simon.
Bill Simon.
Who had been
And-
Treasury Secretary under
right,
who?
right.
Under what president?
Ford.
Ford?
Ford?
I think so.
Nixon.
I think he was energy under
Ford.
Nixon and
It's only close.
energy under Nixon.
And they came up with the
before.
plan, and what they did was, they released the plan at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon at the Robert Treat Hotel. They left it on the seats of the room that they rented, and there was no one there to answer any questions.
I didn't know.
And that was their plan.
Jim Goodman, did you go pick up a copy of the plan?
No, it was a press conference that was before,
Okay.
and then the governor called it BS.
All right, keep okay. Does anybody remember, other than what it got called, does anybody remember what was in that plan?
Yeah.
Sure.
Wasn't there something that, Jeffrey, you found, some vote that Ray Bateman?
Famous debate. This was, the
Right.
legislature had only begun to compile committee amendment records during our previous 4 years. And in one of the debates, Bateman, who have been banging away, this is not, I'm afraid, the Simon plan, we can come back to that in a moment, but on the casinos, that holding the governor to task, taking him to task for there being a potential revolving door. And there was an amendment that had been presented in the Judiciary Committee to the casino legislation to bar people from going from state government into the casino industry. And as the governor said in the debate, he read the amendment, he said, and Raymond H. Bateman voted no, which shattered Ray for the rest of that debate. It was a climactic moment. With regard to the Simon plan, as I recall dimly, which is what it justifies, I guess, there was a reshuffling of what could be financed through property taxes, a suggestion of some other unspecified state taxes, huge holes and huge question marks and fudges, which became the subject then of editorial comment in all of the major newspapers that this is a non-plan and a hoax.
All right, if it got left on a chair in Newark on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, and it was the Bateman-Simon plan, how much time elapsed before it became known as the BS plan, and how did that happen?
One of the key moments in that campaign on this issue was in a debate where they were asked the question about their plans, and Bateman got up and described this plan, which was really half-baked. And he sat down, and Brendan got up and said to the audience, "Did you understand that? I didn't understand that. I'm going to concede my time to Ray to try and explain that again." And he sat down. And Ray
Bateman takes the bait.
Yeah, Ray he stands up, he sort of half gets up and then half gets down, and the audience starts laughing, and then he gets up and he's lost. It was a wonderful moment. So that.
And as I recall, the Secretary Simon left town. Right after all of this had been put out, he left town, so nobody could ask him. He was gone.
Yeah, he disowned it.
He disowned the plan.
Right.
But Governor, you were not sure whether to use the BS phrase, is that correct? And your secretary
we had spent-
suggested you not use it? Or?
Yes, we had spent all day Sunday with the financial guys from our administration, analyzing the plan. And I was ready on Monday to have a press conference, and I had, I think, Cliff Goldman next to me, and I was going to tear the plan apart. And so I was ready to go out to the press conference, and I said to my secretary, Dorothy Selfie, who just died recently, by the way, great girl. She had been secretary to Minor, Hughes, and me. And so on the way out, I said, you know what, maybe I'll call this plan the BS plan. And she said, no, that's below your dignity. So I go out, and I don't call it the BS plan. And the last question asked, and Jim Goodman is here, the last question asked at that press conference, it gave me an opening to say, this plan will soon be known by its initials.
I don't remember that.
No, I never call it the BS plan. I just said it would be known by its initials. As a matter of fact, Jim Goodman's, that was the last question. I was walking back into the office, and Jim Goodman, you was calling this the bullshit plan? I never answered that question.
How did the voters in October of '77 feel about this income tax that was now about 1 year old, I gather? How did they feel about it?
Very happy. In fact, we went to a major event, the opening of the racetrack.
When? What time frame? What time?
76.
Go ahead, tell the story.
Oh, we went to a racetrack, and all of a sudden we decided we didn't have enough security.
That was the week that the tax took effect, right?
Exactly, right. And we got out of there real fast.
Yeah.
Well, so they forgave Brendan for this tax they didn't like? I mean, what caused this massive shift from September to November?
I remember meeting a professor from Rutgers after that election, and he looked at me and said, I swore I'd never do it.
You know,
He voted for him.
Ray Bateman disappeared for the month of
Right.
August. He went to his cabin in Maine, and he talked about his cabin. He was so sure he was going to win, he took the election for granted.
Should have stayed there in September and October.
There were a lot of other things going on. Remember I think it was early September, I love Ray Bateman too, but he was involved in the King of Wood-Eye four-way. And that was negative background information about Joe Wood-Eye, who the governor had appointed as chairman of the Casino Control Commission. And that was a moment of panic that some of us thought it was going to be the negative turning point in the election.
What was in that four-way?
You know, as Joe Wood-Eye used to say about himself, you can't grow up in Newark without rubbing elbows with the wrong people, or he said one time, when I was shooting craps on the streets in Newark, I never realized someday I'd be controlled.
So was Ray Bateman engaging in dirty politics? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Was politics dirty?
The state police were engaging in dirty politics. That's something they've done several times in their history. They leaked that four-way precisely to prevent Brendan Byrne from being reelected.
Why? Why did they want
They leaked it to the
Bateman?
Bateman campaign.
Why did they want Bateman?
I don't frankly think that the state police liked having as governor a prosecutor who was savvy about law enforcement, who was a supporter of the state police but believed that they needed to be governed, that they weren't an independent, sacrosanct, standalone entity of state government.
But we also, because of the budget crunch we were in and the fact that the income tax, even when it came, was all for local aid, we were very tough on public employees. I mean, we had 1 year where we gave them no increases, no cost of living, no benefits. I mean, we had strikes at the state colleges. There were understanding public employee leaders who felt that we were fighting for progressive causes, but among the rank and file, we were not wildly popular because we were, the opposite of generous.
I just have one thing. This is really about you, Governor, today, not about us, but for me, a turning point in the campaign was when Dick Leone agreed to come back and chair it. We used to meet every Monday morning, actually every day the last 2 months of the campaign.
And you had to read the newspapers
Jerry and I
before
pretty
you
much-
came, right?
Jerry and I pretty much stayed in
Right.
government. And
I gotta
Bob
tell that.
Marcelli
I gotta tell
and
this story. And you had to read the newspapers every morning, because Dick Leone, if you didn't read the newspapers, he would ask you to leave the meeting.
And what time was the meeting?
It was at the DeVega, it was at
I don't know what that place was.
the place, it was DeVega,
Yeah.
headquarters, on the extension of US 1. Of course,
Around the Brunswick Circle there?
down in Ewing.
And what time was the meeting?
Early in the morning, like 8 o'clock.
And you had to drive down from North Jersey, but you had to
Right.
have read the papers as well before
Exactly.
you got
Right,
there.
right.
And out of that meeting, we had our daily marching orders. And
Right.
Jerry and I would go back to the State House, we'd convene a meeting of most of the people in this room who were in the cabinet at the time and ask them what they intended to do that week, and they would tell us, and we would say no. Don't do anything.
John and I were not invited to dinner with anyone ever.
And then we had,
But Dick's
well,
leadership, I just want to, I want to say, the single thing that won that election was Brendan Byrne's character and his ability as a campaigner and
Two
his integrity. The second thing was Dick's leadership.
the other
Go
thing
ahead.
was there was Henry Luther. And he just played the role of the campaign manager. And everybody would walk in and always wanted to see Henry and try to make the deals. And every time people would walk out and they said, I don't understand what he said. But they had a smile. And they just went on their way. And the other thing, and the other individual that played a key role in this was Ken Gibson. Because I remember he got a phone call from the governor asking, can he come down to Washington? And Gibson got on a train
What time frame?
before he finally made a decision.
So like February of
Right.
that year, go ahead.
And you asked, and Ken Gibson and I came down in the train ride, met you in the hotel. The meeting took 5 minutes. Gibson agreed to support you when you asked him. No ties, nothing like that. And at the end of that conversation, we got up in 5 minutes and got back on the train. And then Ken Gibson asked me to go see Harry Lerner, who was the powerful chairman of Essex County, and inform him that we're supporting Brendan Byrne and we're going off the line. And the nucleus of that type of meeting led to I think the troops and the ground support that we had in the primary, and we also had in the general election. They were sincere, dedicated Byrne loyalists. Some of them in the room today. Some have passed on. But they were the real troopers. They were out there day in, day out. Phil Freeman, who's now a Superior Court judge, I think he's retired. I mean, Charlie Walters, Elton Hill, Terry Bonanno. Those were the people that were out in the field, south, north, and everything else.
What Harold forgot to tell you is that Ken Gibson loaned me Harold Otis.
And people would leave the room after meeting with Harold and say, what did he say?
Alan Sagner, you were Transportation Commissioner in the first Byrne administration, right?
Yes.
What did you do in the campaign, or did you stay at Transportation?
Well, in '77, Brendan had kicked me up to the Port Authority, and I became chairman of the Port Authority, so I was not very involved in the campaign. In fact, Brendan was being interviewed by Dick Leone on Channel 13, and having pointed me there, and there were some complaints about what the Port Authority was doing, and he said to Dick in this interview on Channel 13, Alan's only been there a few months, and he's already on their side instead of being on the New Jersey side.
Brendan Byrne was being interviewed by Dick Leone
That
on
was-
Channel 13?
that was years later.
We would call that a conflict of interest today, wouldn't we?
That was years later.
Years later.
That was like 1980.
Incidentally,
We were telling that story.
I wanted Alan Sagner, with his progressive attitude toward mass transit, to be chairman of the Port Authority. This was in 1977. I had I thought, the votes to do it. The New York commissioners refused to move it. And I explored that, and they told me that I was going to leave the governorship that fall anyway, because I wasn't going to get reelected, and so they're going to wait for my successor. And I called Hugh Carey, and I told Hugh Carey what the situation was, and within a week, Hugh Carey had it straightened out, ironed out, and he began. And Hugh Carey and I got along, and we ought to discuss that sometime, how governors get along. Hugh Carey and I got along very well, and accomplished a lot as a result of that. I remember when they wanted to land the Concorde in New York, and Hugh Carey took a lot of heat because Queens, New York was his home area. People were complaining about the noise and the disruption. And so we worked it out that Hugh Carey would announce that he is opposed to the Concorde landing in Kennedy, and that he would ask the Port Authority to pass a resolution forbidding it. He makes that announcement. Next day I make an announcement saying if the Port Authority passes that resolution, I'll veto it. Everybody was happy.
I know from the interviews I've done for this Byrne project, Byrne Archive project, that David Garth, the media guru of the time in New York, didn't want to sign on to this re-election campaign?
He would not sign on, and he would not do the primary ad. And in fact...
He was afraid of his own reputation?
Yeah, he thought it was impossible to win. And in fact, we put together a rump group, including one person from his organization, created a production company called Shooting Star. This was an unusual campaign by contemporary. We didn't show the polls to anybody. We didn't have anybody else involved in the media. It was all too discouraging. Frankly, the reason for that was until very late, anybody participating in what would be a conventional campaign meeting would have walked out and said, "This is hopeless." So we made the one commercial for the primary. The people who really deserve the credit are not me, even to some extent not Brendan, but they were the people Harold was talking about. They signed notes. People had no money in order to finance the campaign. Remember, 14 out of the 21 Democratic chairmen were against us. We didn't have the money to do anything in the primary. You know, you had people who had nothing in the bank signing notes to give us money. We all signed notes in April so the campaign could continue.
We had to didn't we have to get Torricelli to ask someone else, his mother put up some money to open up the...
I don't know.
You all had to sign notes, personal?
No, we signed personal notes so we'd have some money to contribute to the campaign.
Right.
But his mother...
Except John Degnan didn't sign.
John signed, and he was the first one to say to all of us on the staff, "I am giving the first, whatever, $600." That was kind of, oh, I wonder if I could get by with not doing that. No, not, and worked there the day after.
Someone we all loved who's not here today, Howard Woodson, was in the cabinet, and we weren't very sophisticated fundraisers. I didn't even know how to ask, but I was in charge of calling the cabinet to ask them for money, and I called Howard one day and I said, "Howard, this is a tough election. We're having a hard time raising money. We need some cash." And I'm asking each cabinet member for it. Next morning, Howard Woodson showed up in my office, which was right outside the governor's office, takes out his wallet, and starts ripping and he handed me $600 bills. And I said, "What the hell am I supposed to do with this?"
Does anybody in the audience want to share a recollection of the 77 or anything, any campaign?
Incidentally, Bobby Torricelli's mother paid the first 2 weeks' rent on our campaign. That's what it is. I never paid her back.
Mitch, I didn't plan to say anything.
Young Harold Martin.
You're a prestigious panel, but you raised a good question before. Your first question, as I recall, was what caused the 73 Democratic victory my judgment, as a former student of political science, that victory goes back some years earlier, the causes of it. 1964, Bergen County had been Republican for 52 years. We hadn't had an elected Democratic freeholder in that period of time, as I'm sure you're aware. And it was my good fortune to have been selected as the third member of the freeholder candidates, just a couple of days before the candidacies were supposed to be submitted to Trent. I came from nowhere. But I did know this, that Bergen County was one of the premier Republican counties in the United States, heavily Republican. And what happened there, as I'm sure you're aware, there was a revulsion in '64 against a man whom I happen to think was a pretty good man, pretty good servant, Barry Goldwater. And so when Goldwater was selected, even before he was chosen, my name was put on the ballot. And for the first time in 52 years, Bergen County became a Democratic county. And without the votes of Bergen County in the '64 election, and in the '73 election, and in the '77 election, I don't think we would have had the victories that we had, because we had a terrific team in '64. Pete Williams, whom I think was a very, very good public servant, took out after Goldwater in a manner in which it was a pleasure to behold. And he mesmerized his audiences. And we had tremendous audiences in Bergen County during that election. And so if you check the record, I think you'll find, as all history demonstrates, the antecedents of '73 and '74 actually can be traced back to '64.
Very good. Anybody else? I got to go cover Menendez at the State House, and I've got to leave. But keep this going until Don and Ruth feel it's time to break for lunch, because a bunch of hands went up. Thank you all.
Good memories.
For being with us.
Thank you, David.
Mike, thanks. There's one dimension to the income tax, or rather to the '77 campaign, that's worth remembering, and that is that the income tax was A, the one source of the governor's unpopularity, and if you could break that, you'd be able to change it, and B, that it was the kind of, how should we put it, the old-style pals in the legislature who actually had put the key to keeping this issue alive. It was crafty Bill Musto's amendment to make this expire in 2 years that made it impossible for Bateman to simply campaign saying it was bad to have enacted it, but now he had to offer something else. And the other dimension that Dan O'Hearn reminded me of is that October 1, the rebate checks landed in people's mail. And again, that was the old style pals in the legislature, right? It said you need to show this in people's hands and not simply as a deduction on the tax bills for them to believe it's real. And in that sense, you had A, the makings of a campaign issue that could be turned around, and B, a reminder that tax reform actually meant something for average people, that rather than simply being a tax on top of all the other taxes.
I think they're going to do away with the rebate checks this year, by the way.
I don't care.
Interesting. It's just an interesting political decision, that's all, as an observation about the current legislature in its wisdom.
I'm David Bardeen. I have an observation, well, that is about the rebate check. Because during the first term, when you went around as a cabinet member talking about anything, people would bring up the income tax, the flip-flop argument and all that sort of stuff, and they did not believe the governor's argument that the income tax would result in lower real property taxes. So when those rebate checks came, and as I recall, one of them was signed Brendan T. Byrne. That was a controversy too. Brendan T. Byrne. It made it real. That was an integrity question. Now I have an inquiry for you. By the second campaign, I was down in Washington with President Carter. And the impression I had, which nobody has mentioned, maybe I was wrong, based on national press, was that Ray was proposing to substitute for the income tax an increase in the New Jersey sales tax. Was that misinformation?
No, it was much more garbled than that. You know, you should mention one thing on property taxes. Property taxes actually did go down. So while we all focus on the rebate checks, people actually, it was one of those years where they found their property taxes went down, and that was meaningful.
Al Burstein.
My name is Albert Burstein. One element of Bergen County upon which Harold Martin is focused has remained unstated. And the reason that I personally believe that there was a change in the momentum of the election was tangibly evidenced when I campaigned with Brendan. Clearly, I remember walking up and down Palisade Avenue in Englewood, and you could just feel the change among the people, and this was in October 1977. The reason was, as I viewed it, that people did not realize, those who were working in New York, living in Bergen County, that the income tax in New Jersey would be credited against whatever they had to pay in New York. Bottom line was that both in Bergen County and in the areas around Camden and Philadelphia, where the same situation obtained, was that they financially benefited from the imposition of the New Jersey tax. And when that realization, that simple math, came before them, they suddenly realized that really they're not badly off at all. What Harold didn't mention was that Bergen County had reverted to Republican control after those few years that after they saw his performance in the so that Bergen at that time was not a lock for Governor Byrne in his re-election campaign. But that fact that the tax did not have that great an impact among all these commuters really had a measurable effect upon the outcome.
Well, why was that in October?
I'm sorry?
Why did that
Rebate
awareness come in?
Rebate checks came
No,
out.
I say that you could feel it coming in October, feeling when the income tax issue.
When we were walking around and doing door-to-door on the television sets, people had placed the rebate checks in the little plastic, and we knew at that time, because we reprinted the rebate checks to include the governor's name. Because inadvertently, the first time around, it was off. But we knew that people were giving him a different type of greeting in October. And then when we had the Ella Grasso rally in Newark at the Robert Treat Hotel, it's the first time he got a sense, before we got on the helicopter, I think we were going to Atlantic City, that the momentum was starting to move, that people were really enthused, and she gave a fiery speech.
One other part of that, which Farabos Fatemi, who is here, is the best roadman in America. If you're a candidate, Farabos kept saying, Governor, we must go back to Ocean County. Governor, what day tomorrow will we be going to Ocean County? Farabos, please explain why we were going to Ocean County.
Thank you very much, Jerry.
Please identify.
Yes, Faribors Fatemi, I was an assistant to the governor.
It's for the record.
Thanks very much, Jerry, because I wanted to point out that possibly not here, but at another meeting, we should talk about the organization that Dick Leone put together. both in 1973 and in 1977. Because without that superior organization, and I'll give you just a couple of examples, Charlie Sandman would be in his helicopter flying around somewhere. We would go to events and people would say, oh, Charlie was here yesterday, evidently coming to an event the day before the event took place. And he would be lost in his helicopter somewhere, and we had a superior campaign organization that I think, from my own observations, and it's limited because I'm not in New Jersey as much, I don't think anybody has seen that kind of a campaign organization since the governor left office. I don't think Kane had it. I don't think Florio had it. Not to be disrespectful to them, but I just don't think that they never understood what that meant in terms of how the governor looked when he was campaigning and how he looked when he was governor. It made a huge amount of difference. And I think that's something that should be discussed and talked about at a different time. It's a whole different subject, which doesn't have anything to do with the policy, substance kinds of things. But I think it made a difference that people talk about the impression about the governor. In the summer of 77, Jerry was alluding to that. And I heard the governor so many times, why do we keep going to South Jersey? Why do we keep going to South Jersey? We had a plan that we're going to lock up South Jersey long before the Republicans even knew what we were doing. And part of that plan was based on the kinds of things the governor did when he was governor by going to a county. We went to all 21 counties of New Jersey, where the governor would be made available. We spent a day there. The governor would be made available. 10 minutes, anybody could walk in, make an appointment, talk with him, and we had staff and we had people who would take care of their problems. And so we went to South Jersey. We spent all summer in South Jersey. He went to every firehouse celebration, every fair. I think the governor told me about it many, many times. I won't say complaining, but maybe very angry with me for taking him down there so many times. And I think Jerry heard about it quite a bit. And she very nicely said to me, why do we keep going to South Jersey? But the result was that when the campaign ended, we ran pretty well in South Jersey. And the more the people saw the governor...
Fair boards, I appreciate that, and I appreciate taking all the credit for it and running around. But the fact is that Dick Leone showed me the polls, and we were doing badly in Ocean County, so we switched our television buys. That's what we did.
I think many of you are ready for lunch, and I want to take a moment. I want to take a moment and a half. The first moment to, I know, have you join me in thanking this wonderful panel and how much. The problem with putting all this on the record and thinking you have the record is that it's not, because it's in all of the, everything here that's suggested that can be turned into its own program. And as we promised early on this morning, that's in the future, and we certainly hope that we'll be able to build on some of this. But it was fascinating to listen to. The governor is going to do the honors at the last moment here to invite you to lunch. So I'm going to ask the governor just to make a couple of comments. If he will please rise, a.k.a. Richard McGlynn.
Uh-oh.
This is, I was in the governor's cabinet on the Public Utilities Commission in 1980 when a number of us were thinking about running for governor. And at one cabinet meeting, all of us.
We all did.
That's true. Virtually everybody did. And at one cabinet meeting, he said, you know, it's amazing. Everybody wants to run for governor. If you're going to run for governor, I don't think you ought to do it from the cabinet. I think you ought to resign. Richie McGlynn wants to run for governor Everybody's running for governor. I guess I made it look too easy.
Thank you, Governor. Lunch is served in the foyer. Welcome back. Those of you who weren't here with us this morning, I'd like to welcome you. I would also like to tell you you missed a great morning, and I'm sorry for you. But because this is an archive project, as we mentioned this morning, everything is being videotaped and will soon be available to the rest of the state, the country, and beyond out in cyberspace. So you'll get a chance to see it if you missed it this morning. We really had a wonderful time, but we have a terrific afternoon lined up as well, and it's my privilege now to turn the microphone over to the president of Rutgers University, Richard McCormick.
Ruth, and good afternoon. Is this mic even working? All right. Never mind, I'm not going there again. I understand you've had mic issues all day. So let me start by thanking Governor and Mrs. Byrne for their support in the gift of his papers and for their fundraising for this program. That fundraising includes generous contributions from many of you in the room this afternoon, and for that I thank you. Ruthie Byrne demonstrated once again, as she did recently for her fundraising to rescue the Governor's School, that she's one of the most effective people in New Jersey in getting things done. Ruthie, thank you very much. Governor Byrne's judgment in selecting key members of his leadership team in Trenton is demonstrated by the continuing prominence of so many of those who served in his administration, who are still current and active and important in New Jersey politics, and who are here this afternoon, and we thank you. We thank you for your presence. With your help from all of you and many more, Rutgers hopes to become the nationally recognized center for encouraging greater scholarly attention on the office and the role of the governor in New Jersey and in the nation through research, publications, and teaching. We are already the leading national resource for scholarship relating to state legislatures, primarily through the work done here at the Eagleton Institute, and it is our aim to occupy a similar position with respect to the governorship. This new program on the governor in the 50 states, with special emphasis on New Jersey, is a natural complement to the important contributions that Rutgers has already made, mainly here at Eagleton, to the study of state government and politics. You have already heard a brief overview this morning from Mark Mappin of the history of New Jersey governors, both good and bad. This one's good. In my own historical study of the Progressive era, I was impressed by the influence that governors of that time had on setting the nation's policy and establishing its political agenda. Today, even more so, as the federal government shifts responsibility to the states, governors are playing an ever more important role in setting policy and establishing our nation's directions. 4 of the last 5 presidents of the United States have been elected after serving as governor. Most recently, we have read of gubernatorial initiatives in Massachusetts on expanding access to health care, and in California on improving air quality that will be closely watched as potential models for similar action by other states and the federal government. Governor Byrne's legacy as governor of New Jersey will be judged by future historians, to be sure, but there can be no question that during his 2 terms he confronted some of the most challenging issues of his time with courage and unquestioned integrity. His initiative in protecting the resources of the Pinelands, which had little initial political support other than his own determination to get it done, has permanently changed how New Jersey will look to the future. Governor Byrne's decision to risk his political future in supporting enactment of the income tax and school aid, which led to those derisive but ultimately incorrect chants of one-term Byrne, is an example of political leadership that few can match. And those are just 2 examples. There are many others. Initiating state legislation that became the model for the federal Superfund program, establishing the public advocate to protect the rights of citizens, building the sports complex and protecting the Meadowlands ecology, creating New Jersey Transit to overhaul an aging public transit system, sparking the rebirth of the Hudson waterfront through the development of Liberty State Park, giving new vitality to the deteriorated resort of Atlantic City, reforming how political campaigns are financed, rewriting the state's archaic criminal laws, opening up government to public accountability and accessibility. He called it government under glass, and supporting higher education and financial aid for students. It's a remarkable list of policy achievements for 8 years. Indeed, no matter how history judges the contributions made by the governor, and many of you sitting in this room were there by his side, there can be no dispute that Brendan Byrne made a huge difference as governor of New Jersey and deservedly already ranks among the state's greatest governors in history. His integrity, his courage, his perseverance in doing what he believed and was the interest of the people of New Jersey, in my judgment as a historian and my observation as a lifelong New Jersey citizen, made New Jersey a better place. Thank you, Governor Brendan Byrne.
Thank you, President McCormick. I'm just passing the mic now to, there he is. I said this morning that the program today, the archive, the plans for the future are all connected very closely to the person who has been working on this day in and day out now for over a year, really. And for whom this has not just been the next thing he's done in his career, but he's come to Eagleton to work on this with us, and it has been a labor of love. Please join me in welcoming and thanking Don Linke.
Thank you, Ruth. I don't know if it's been a labor of love to go through all the papers that I have stacked in my office all over the place. But it's been interesting to find some of the old chestnuts from the Byrne administration. The governor's papers are now really in 3 separate places. The state archives has most of the administration official government records. As we've heard, the Rutgers libraries have some other papers, mostly personal papers, a lot of papers from his early career that Ron Becker will describe in a couple minutes. And he also, many years ago, gave other papers to the Seton Hall libraries. So Seton Hall has papers that are largely the 1973 campaign, and again, personal papers. They also have some official papers that legitimately really should be in Trenton. But in any event, they're all scattered about in 3 places, and we felt that in trying to develop this archive and make it most useful to people to use, the best way was to do it electronically over the internet and to provide public access over the web to all this sort of wealth of material showing how decisions were made, how the times were sort of shaped in those days, and sort of put together this permanent and I think emerging profile. I appreciate the contributions that some of you have given to me in photos and memos. I still have a lot of papers that we still haven't scanned and put up on the web, but we're working there. We're not quite ready, I think, yet to go public with what we've done, but I wanted at least to sort of show you in a very brief way, I guess, where we're going and what we might want to do. The first page you see, which I know you can't read, but this is a page of Governor Byrne's humor. So the first one is, I want to be buried in Hudson County so that I can stay active in politics. But we have a whole series of jokes, comments, and other, I can't get my mouse to work. Well, in any event, I can't scroll down. Let me go to another page. This is a sort of a selection of research about the governor's office around the country. We're going to expand this and provide a whole series of links, curricula plans, bibliographies about the office of the governor. This is the home page for the overall project. And this is the homepage for the Brendan Byrne Archive. As you can see, we have a biography of his career, documents and source documents and images, mostly photos, campaign posters. Then we have interviews of the people that we've been talking to over the last few months. Eventually, our interviews will be up in video format, but there's some technical problems, including trying to get a larger server to put all those video files up that we have to overcome first. And then a timeline of the significant events during his career, most of it prepared by the Rutgers libraries as part of the finding aid to the papers that they'll talk about after I'm finished. But let me just sort of give you an idea of what you'll be able to see on the website. There will be hundreds of documents, and you'll just be able to click to see what you'd like in terms of illustrations. This is the memo that the aforementioned James Azali wrote to the governor on May 1, 1973, while he was still a sitting judge, deciding whether he was going to run for governor. And it's the record of Prosecutor Byrne during his tenure in office concerning gambling, organized crime, etc. Obviously, I think trying to prepare for the campaign as to what was going to be coming up during in the campaign about his record. So the first one is the establishment of the Charlie Squad, named after Charlie Corella, and pertinent news clippings, comparison of activities of the Essex Gambling Squad under Prosecutor Byrne with the Newark Police Department Gambling Squad, and so forth. I know we don't have too much time to go to too many of these, but here, Dick McManus and Arlene Gardner are both here today, and here's one of their memos critiquing Lou Gambaccini's proposal to increase I don't know if that's the one that went through. But Lou said in his interview, if we had only done that then, we would be swimming in money now. In any event. Can
you read the last line there?
Yeah. Oh, I didn't see that. That's the first time I noticed that. The last line says, Don Linke does not think the whole idea is politically viable given the experience with the gasoline tax last January. I guess he took my advice. Now, in any event, I think there's a lot of interesting material here, and I don't think there's going to be anything like this on the internet anywhere. So I think that you'll enjoy it. It's going to be, I think, a fun thing to work on in the future. And also, I would appreciate any further contributions that you might make in terms of documents, photos, or anything else that you think might be useful to this project. We also talked a little bit about other things that we are going to do in this program. We have been discussing with Mike Fedorko and Marty Greenberg and Steve Persky doing a special program in Atlantic City to talk about not only the history of casino gambling in Atlantic City, but also where is the city going today. And we're trying to organize that program. I talked out at lunch with Alan Handler and Dan O'Hearn about possibly doing one on the governor and the Supreme Court. So we're looking for other ideas and other topics and programs that we might put together. Last week, the governor also sent a series of letters to both sitting and former governors around the country, and we're starting to get those responses in about coming to Eagleton to lecture. here for our governor's program. Governor Dukakis already has accepted in concept, and we're just going to set a date with him. Governor Thornburg also said he was enthusiastic about working on the program and coming. And then yesterday I got a call from Ed Rendell's office saying that they had the small problem of an election coming up in November. And I said, well, after you win, please come. And they said they would. So we already have 3, I think, positive responses in probably about a week since those letters went out. So we're very encouraged that we're going to have a very interesting and exciting program. We're also going to be inviting journalists and others who follow states around the country and follow governors in particular. Now I'd like to sort of turn the microphone over to Dan Tishner, who will talk very briefly about what we're looking to do in terms of an academic component of this program. Dan?
Thanks, Don. You know, note that Don said very briefly. He told me 5 minutes or less, which is always dangerous with we academic types because we tend to speak in 1 hour increments that fit with our lectures. I promised actually to be very brief. One of the things that when Don and I were starting to look into this notion of a program that would be able to allow us to study the role and office of the governor, we noted that there's actually not much out there, which is partly why I can talk for 5 minutes or less. First thing we found is that you cannot, if you look across universities in the United States, you're not going to find centers that exist that investigate the role and office of the governor in the United States, either historically or in its contemporary version. The second thing that we thought about was looking at the disciplines. And if you look at least in political science, you're not going to find many specialists on the governor. In fact, most of us, I'm Exhibit A of this, who study executive politics, look at the presidency first and foremost. And secondly, look at executive politics more broadly. So this struck us from the very beginning as a lacuna that needed to be redressed in some fashion. Finally, if you want to look at the literature, the academic literature, most of the stuff on the governor that's out there is about a half-century old, and I can assure you, without you having to consult the literature, a lot of it is a good cure for insomnia. There's a need for some fresh research in this area. As President McCormick alluded to a moment ago, Rutgers has a national reputation in terms of the study of the state legislatures, thanks to Alan Rosenthal. Just down the road in Camden, my friend Al Tarr and established a reputation for Rutgers in terms of the study of state constitutional law and the role of the courts. So we think it's time to add the third leg to the stool and really develop a strong presence in terms of studying, again, the office and the role of the governor and the issues that concern them. We think that this is really a significant opportunity to build on, and the oral histories that have begun to be collected on Governor Byrne's term in office, and in addition, the archival materials we think is a great start. What we'd like to do is expand, take advantage of this incredible resource of former governors we might be able to talk to and other executive officials. And our hope is actually to begin to develop, and we're very much at the drawing board stage of this, but lecture series, conferences, publications, and some careful studies that begin to dig into this important subject matter. To give you 2 quick examples, one thing that we have in mind, for instance, is to perhaps have a lecture series that would look at emergency management. So we could bring in scholars like David Brinkley to talk about the Katrina experience, but also bring in those who are at the front lines. Or contrast that, for instance, with an example of intergovernmental relations working extremely well with something like the 3 Mile Island incident, and have Dick Thornburg and other scholars come join us to talk about that. So we have high hopes for this, and we welcome your suggestions. So, I'm done.
Come on. Check, check, check. Just switch the batteries. Switch on the other one. It's not, it's neither one. Go ahead.
After we build an endowment for this program, we will have functioning technology, which will help us in all respects. It's been a pleasure in this project so far We've had a terrific experience doing something that those of us at the university increasingly look for opportunities to do, and that is work with other units, work across departments, work across schools, work across institutions. And we've been working with the Rutgers libraries on this project, and I couldn't have hoped for a better set of partners, from the top of the library down to all the people who have taken the papers and begun to work with them. I'm going to turn this over now to one of those partners, Ron Becker, who will describe the library's role in this and what's been accomplished so far. And are you going to be talking about also what you're planning to do, right?
Hey, thank you very much. This has been just a wonderful collaboration. I want to start again thanking Governor Byrne and Ruthie Byrne for inviting us into her house and into their basement to see these records for the first time. I came with my conservator, who is very much an enemy of the word mold, and so he will not let me bring any collections back that are moldy. So we had a few tussles over what we thought we could save and what we couldn't, but we found a real treasure trove of material. And I also want to thank both of you for the incredible fundraising efforts that you've done to make all this possible. You've heard about the wonderful things that are being done here at Eagleton and the Internet Archives, but to take care of the actual material that makes up this Internet Archives is a very, very labor-intensive and has lots of hidden costs in it, because you have to turn these materials coming out of basements in an unorganized fashion into something that's very well organized. And so the first thing we did was hired our Byrne archivist, David D'Onofrio. Dave, can you wave your hand here? Who's just done a tremendous job. I have some copies of the completed finding aid, and I'll also show it to you on the internet to show you how one gets access to a collection, how we can turn it into a collection that can be used by scholars all over the world. And all that really takes a lot of effort by a lot of people, and the fundraising part was the key part to get us started with it. And not only does it start us with Governor Byrne's papers, but it also allows us to do the papers of other governors and really get a foothold in this whole area to support the programs being done at Eagleton, and hopefully we'll continue this great collaboration well into the future. The first thing we're going to do now that we've completed the Byrne papers is to do papers of Governor Florio and Governor Cahill. And we too found some official papers among the papers we had, and we did a little swap with the state archives. We gave them some state records that you had in the house in return for Governor Cahill's papers as congressman, which they're not allowed to have at the state archives. So we built that. Now we have to process those papers, and those are by far the two biggest collections. But we also have papers of some earlier governors, 18th and 19th century governors, and I'm happy to say that none of them make the three best or the three worst that you have here, but we do have a number of papers. Those collections are much smaller, so we won't have to do the same kind of effort that we're doing with these massive collections. The finding aid, which I'm going to show you in just a minute, is 68 pages long, so David has essentially written an entire book to get this thing done and get it available to other researchers. We also have the papers of governors Robert Greene, William Patterson, Rodman Price, Peter Vroom, and Marcus Ward, and individual letters and what have you of every other governor who's ever served. So we're going to be doing all of this thanks to the fundraising efforts that we have and great archivists like Dave who come on and do this great work. So this is our catalog. This is part of what we call, it's nicknamed Iris. So when you come on the Rutgers page, you just go into Iris, and it's the first thing you'll see on the left. And then when I click Brendan Byrne papers, this is what we get. And it's a description generally of the papers. This is the cataloging record. And it says how big it is. And it says what the kinds of things that are in it. There are press clippings, there are periodicals, there's correspondence, there are documents. There are many, many, many pictorial materials, photographs, political cartoons. All of which really are going to be used by scholars in many, many different fields going through studying this period and studying what went on not only in New Jersey but really in the whole country during that time. It's just a real pleasure to be in front of an audience like this. So many of you participated so intimately in this administration. And I guarantee you, David tells me he knows all of you. through the papers. You're all represented in this collection. It's really amazing. And the collection goes all the way back to 1928, as you'll see, when you were all 4 years old. So we do have some early family papers as well, papers documenting service in the military and other personal material that goes outside the governorship. And then we have lots of, just in case the person who's researching doesn't know who Brendan Byrne is, they can get through it just by clicking one of the subject areas and still find the collection there. Okay, now hopefully I can get this to work so I can get you right to the finding aid. That 68-page finding aid I discussed is available just by clicking a link on here. And that would be here. This will take us right to the finding aid. I have a few paper copies of that finding aid. Because it's 68 pages long, we couldn't make too many, but I do have about a half a dozen or so. So if somebody would actually like to have a paper copy, it's very similar to what you have here. But this is what a finished finding aid looks like, and you can get to it right from the Rutgers catalog from any computer anywhere just by getting on the Rutgers library page. And it's an inventory of the entire collection. You can see on the left the table of contents, the types of things that are in there. There's biographical information, and then there's information about all the series that were created from within the papers. You can see campaign material, speeches, programs of events, personal correspondence, subject files, photographs, and what have you. And then once you've decided, oh, this is something I want to see, you go all the way down to the container list. You can see every single folder has a heading, and it's indexed so that you can get right down to the folder that you want. One of the problems that we have in collections that we're not so fortunate to process to this level is that you got to tear apart the whole collection to look for one document. The nice thing about preparing a finding aid like this is you can get right to what you're interested in seeing. So we hope that many of you will come and use the collection, tell people about it, and we hope to really continue to expand our efforts and appreciate what the Byrne family has done and what the Eagleton Foundation has done, and really all of you for making up this great history. Now, I also heard from my colleague Mark Mappin that others of you have papers around here, and I know at least one of you, Susan Wilson here, has donated her papers and her mother's papers. If you have papers and you feel like throwing them out, don't throw them out. Even if we find out that they probably should be thrown out, let us throw them out. We'll do you the favor of cleaning out your house, because a lot of this material could be very valuable. Okay, very good. I will, anybody please contact me. If you go on this page, you'll see my name and phone number and everything. You can get to us. So again, thank you very much, and we hope to be continuing this, over the long run with Eagleton. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ron. Jerry English is already inviting him over to clean out her basement, and you've heard several times the reference to the work here at Eagleton over the last 40 years now, almost 40 years, on state legislatures, and it wouldn't be a session here if we didn't link the program today to the legislature, the governor and the legislature, and there's no one who can run that discussion better than Professor Alan Rosenthal.
Legislatures isn't in the papers. As a matter of fact, it reminds me of a Massachusetts story. An old Massachusetts politician said, if you can say it, don't write it. If you can nod, don't say it. And if you can wink, don't nod. And I think that's the experience everywhere. I'm a little uncomfortable on this panel because I've been a student of legislatures for so long. I can't quite deal with governors. About a week ago, I was in the State House visiting somebody in the policy office of the governor, and I absolutely felt uncomfortable. I started to scratch an itch, and when I got out of that office and into the new wing and into the partisan offices of the reassured by seeing in this panel 4 members or former members of the New Jersey legislature. Now, let me just set the stage.
stage for the discussion of the governor and the legislature, the governor of New Jersey and the legislature in New Jersey for a period of 8 years while Brendan Byrne was governor. My finding in looking at legislatures and looking at governors from the legislative perspective is that the governor almost always has the upper hand. It doesn't matter what state you're dealing with, whether it's New Jersey or South Carolina or California, the governor has the upper hand, politically, constitutionally, and structurally. The governor is one, and that is the governor's greatest advantage. The governor makes a decision after consulting, and the legislature has to struggle to reach decision. It's a struggle between two houses, except in Nebraska, where they only have to struggle in one house. It's a struggle often between two parties. It's a struggle between 80 members of an assembly and 40 members of the Senate, or whatever the number in that particular body. And because the governor is one, the governor also has the bully pulpit. The governor is one statewide and can appeal to the press, and through the press can appeal to the people directly. Nobody speaks for the legislature. Even the leadership has trouble getting the kind of attention that governors get. Governors can focus on a legislative agenda. They're much more discriminating than legislatures have to take whatever stuff comes their way. Their plate is full, it's overflowing, they've got to deal with it. Governors choose what to deal with and how to deal with it. And as for the rest, they can veto or not sign or whatever. Governors have the power of providing legislators with benefits, very important benefits, appointments, projects, just attention. Attention is very important. They have the power to deny legislators benefits, particularly through the veto or threatening the veto. And then, I think the final major power that governors have vis-a-vis legislatures is the governor, if he is of the party of the legislative majority, the governor will get, to a degree, the loyalty of the majority party. People in his party or her party want to be with the governor. And if those people have to run on a ticket with the governor, they have even more of a reason why they don't want to embarrass the governor. They want to support the governor. Now, obviously, it's different for, Brendan Byrne, who had 8 years of a Democratic legislature, than it is for a Bob Ehrlich now in Maryland, a Republican with a Democratic legislature, or Mitt Romney up in Massachusetts, a Republican with a Democratic legislature, or Janet Napolitano, Democrat with a Republican legislature in Arizona. Well, what's the legislature got in this exchange? I mean, the most important thing the legislature has is if the governor wants legislation or whatever the governor wants by way of a budget, the legislature has got to approve it. The legislature has got to enact a governor's initiatives. Legislatures, until relatively recently, didn't have a heck of a lot of independent capacity. But in the late 1960s and into the 1970s and perhaps into the early 80s, and varying in different states, legislatures were building capacity to do the job, putting in more time, getting better facilities, and most important, adding to their professional staffs. And that kind of capacity building was sort of beginning and going on at just about the time that Brendan Byrne took office. And then when Brendan Byrne left office and Tom Kean came in, there was a jump in capacity, mainly a partisan capacity, put together by the legislatures, and primarily with the initiative of Speaker Alan Karcher. The second year, however, the second element that the legislature needs is not only capacity, but they need the will to kind of behave as a co-equal branch of government. And there are some traditionally willful legislatures over the years: Massachusetts, Ohio, Colorado, Mississippi, New York. And there are some legislatures that have traditionally had very little backbone vis-a-vis governors and trying to exercise independent power. Louisiana is one, Maryland is probably another. But having said all of this, setting this part of the stage, the performance of a governor vis-a-vis the legislature really depends on how the governor deals with the legislature, how the governor approaches the legislature, and on many other particular factors. And there are a range of approaches that governors use in dealing with legislatures and approaching legislatures. And I think they depend upon really gubernatorial personalities, the personalities of these people, as well as their beliefs about leadership. On one hand, you have occasionally, but very occasionally, a deferential governor, a governor who says, well, you know, under our political system, the legislature enacts law and the governor implements and administers law. There are very few of those cats around. One of them was Harry Hughes of Maryland, who basically allowed Ben Cardin, who was Speaker at the time, Speaker of the House of Delegates, to kind of take all of the initiatives. But that's the way Harry Hughes saw government. There are also what I would call collegial governors, governors who really get like legislatures and can work with them. Jim Edgar in Illinois was one. Ned McWhirter was probably as close to the legislature as anyone could be in Tennessee, having been the Speaker of the House in Tennessee. Or William Weld in Massachusetts, who came in one way and quickly learned that he had to be, or it was best to be collegial, and given his light personality, it was easy for him to do it. There are other governors who sort of say, you know, let's just make a deal. I think Arnold Schwarzenegger is kind of a deal maker. He loves making deals, but he hasn't quite figured out how to do it. And he's, you know, started out by cozying up to the legislature, then he went along and he couldn't get the deal he wanted, and he put 4 items on the ballot, got beaten on the ballot, and now he is back to dealing by cozying up to the legislature. There are other governors who want to be arm's length. You go my way, I'll go, you go your way, I'll go my way. Bob Taft in Ohio just sort of couldn't cozy up to the legislature, but, you know, he dealt as governor with governors who are more aggressive, sort of follow me, Paris Glendenning in Maryland, pretty aggressive, Bob Graham in Florida, George Pataki currently in New York. They don't want a heck of a lot of trouble with their legislatures. And then I think at the extreme, there are governors who say, you know, they draw a line in the sand, my way or the highway. Bob Ray of Iowa had contempt for the Iowa legislature. William Donald Schaefer in Maryland was at war with the legislature. And Jesse Ventura in Minnesota was just trying to kind of cash in on being governor and dealing with the legislature and worrying about his future career in life. There are very different approaches in New Jersey. I think if you look at the governors here, the approaches of Dick Hughes and a Bob Minor and a Jim Florio and a Christie Whitman have been quite different, one from the other, or Bill Cahill. So the question really that I want to throw out to the panel of legislators and Bob Mulcahy, who was chief of staff to Governor Byrne, is the question is, what was Brendan Byrne's approach to the legislature? How did he see the legislature? And that approach, how did he deal with the legislature? Did it change over the course of time? And did that seem to be an effective approach? So let me throw that out to you. Let me ask Mr. Mulcahy first. How do you see that?
4-0. I can only speak as chief of staff for the second term. I remember very vividly when the governor called me in December and talked to me about assuming the position, and he said that he wanted to reorganize his office. He wanted to create the position, and if I would do the job, he would give me the authority to do it. And we talked about assembling a staff, and when I look around here, I have very fond memories of everybody in this room, because I think we all started at a time when we were really inspired by Kennedy, and we're really out to do what we thought was the right thing. It may not have always been, but we tried to do what we thought was right. But we put together, when you think about this, Harold Hodes, Jerry English, Stu Pollock, Tim Carden, Don Linke were all in the governor's office at that time. And I thought it was a wonderful time to be in government. What we decided to do in the second term was the governor decided on the initiatives that he was going to have. We created an administration bill list, and we told the cabinet that they had to be in line on the bill list, that if we caught them in there lobbying on anything on their own without our acknowledgement, there would be problems. The other thing that the governor did, which I think gets to your question, Alan, is he told the legislature that I had the authority to make arrangements with the legislature. Now, in private, he told me I better not screw up. But that enhanced our ability to deal with the leadership at a time when a lot of the sessions went into the evening, and we would be the only ones there. We also did things, he would give us his credit card, and we would, between Harold and Jerry and myself, we would go to Lorenzo's when a lot of the legislators would go there. And we spent time with both sides creating civility. And I think that civility is the trait that enabled us to get so many things done. And there are a lot of stories that about how we passed certain bills, and I'm sure we'll get into some of them. But just to give you an example, one night we were trying to pass an urban aid bill, and we couldn't get the votes, and I finally decided that we would add about $4 million for the rural legislators to get the votes. And I called Morvan, and the governor said, "You didn't tell him I'm going to sign the bill because I won't." He did. But I think it was, he taught me also a lot about decision making, because in a way I thought that once we had initiatives, we were quick to go out and want to create the events that would get us to that decision. You can't always do that. And in dealing with the legislature, there are times when you have to let them be in the lead. There were times when we wanted to pass things like the Pinelands that we took the lead. But I think that it was an understanding that they were a co-equal branch, and we had to deal with them, and we had to do it in a manner that would exist the following week and the week after that, because there were a lot of things that we had to do.
Well, let's take a different perspective. How did, Bill Hamilton, how did you see it?
Well, I think, first of all, Brendan Byrne was always, from day one to the day he left, a very proud guy, and on a personal basis, my dealings were always just 4-0. I think in the beginning, the governor did not understand the legislation, and I think his staff had little regard, by and large, for the legislature as a group. There were individual people, I think that Steve Persky, Al Burstein, that you couldn't help but have regard for them. But I honestly think that there was not a great regard for the mass of legislators. I think by the time the second term came around, and Bob Mulcahy probably put his finger on it, the civility, the idea that we were a co-equal branch had come into play, and I think there was an entire different approach in the second term than there was in the first term. There was a learning curve for everybody. You have to remember the legislature, none of us had been in the majority. We've been shunted off if we were carryovers from the Cahill years. And we had a learning curve with dealing with the front office. They had a learning curve in dealing with us. And I think the proof is in the pudding. In the long run, it worked out. But it worked out really because of the governor's leadership and the personal traits that he had. I never saw anything mean in the governor. We might have disagreed with him. We thought he was going off in the wrong direction a lot of times. But I think on a personal level, there was always a lot of regard for just about everybody, and I think that made a lot of difference.
Harold, you see the governor's operation, the governor in the front office operating in the legislature.
I was not in a leadership position, as you know, I was one of the troops. As a matter of fact, my seat in the assembly was the last row. I was a sort of a backbencher, if you will. And my perspective was as one of the troops. And in that regard, I felt, as Bill just expressed it, that our first term, at least first couple of years, maybe 18 months, 2 years, whatever, there was a learning curve, and we were, as Bill said, coming out of the minority into the majority, which creates problems, as you know. Who the leadership is going to be, how you're going to get along with the leadership, how you're going to relate to your counterpart. As you know, you got a senator and 2 assemblymen from each of the districts. We got 40 districts in New Jersey, as you know. And sometimes you don't always get along with your counterpart in the other house. So that there's an adjustment that has to be made vis-a-vis your colleague in the lower house and your colleague in the Senate. And in addition to that is your relationship to the governor. My view of Brendan Byrne, for whom I have a high regard, as he knows, was that he was our leader, and I was prepared to march to his bugle. Of course, up to, some extent.
Not over the cliff.
I mean, I do have principles, as I'm sure we all have. But I'll never forget, it stands out in my mind very vividly. It was a Sunday morning. I believe it was Sunday, it might have been Saturday, but I think it was Sunday. We met in one of the other buildings. Was it the Ag building? Labor building? Labor building. And we had a big turnout. And it was on a serious subject, I guess. Was it the income tax? I think.
Budget, state budget.
State budget. Whatever it was, I kind of felt empathetic, sorry, if you will, for the governor, because it was a sort of an all or nothing situation. He made his pitch before us, and we were pretty much scattered. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been down there on a Sunday. And if I recall correctly, and I hope I'm not embarrassing you, Brendan, he was almost in tears, as near as I could determine. He was swallowing hard. And I was determined to help as much as I could to let him have his way. And I gather that a lot of others felt the same way. Politics, up to a point, you can listen, you can be critical, you can be cynical at times, but there are times also when true emotions rule the day, and that was one of them. And I'm happy to say that I've tried to be one of Brendan's good soldiers.
You were. I heard fine, you were certainly one of the good soldiers. You were lost in battle, right?
Well, I have, in some respects, a similar view to Bill Hamilton, but in other respects, a different view. First of all, I thought that Brendan was always very, very personally, very accessible, very easy to deal with on a personal level. And while Bill says that the staff, and I agree, the staff was very, very tough on the legislature, I thought that Brendan was... That's great. You have blamed the staff. Operating principle of any government. But I thought he was... Even 40 years later. But,
people tend to be free agents and tend to be very, very fractious. And in that first term, we had 66 Democrats and only 14 Republicans. And there were a lot of guys who thought they could care less. They were having a hell of a good time, and they would do whatever they wanted to do. And that made life very, very difficult. Now, if you only have 41 votes, every vote counts, and everybody tends to pull together and work together. And I think that was a big part of the dynamics that was occurring in the first session, was we just had too many votes. And there are a lot of people, and I won't mention them, who have gone on to be very, very important political people who were among the most difficult during that first session. And then there are others, like I think Harold's running mate, who figured nobody ever won this seat before as a Democrat, and nobody ever will again, and I'm going to do whatever I please. I couldn't care less. So that was part of it. Another thing that I think President McCormick mentioned about government under glass. I was there, and as Bill was, when we were in the governor's office, and he talked about that idea. And I remember very well what he said. You know, he said, we've got, I don't know, 10, 12 people in the room at the time. He said, whatever happens in this room, I guarantee within 15 minutes, the Star Ledger will know about it. So we might as well be very open about it and tell them right up front. And I think that was the genesis of his concept of government under glass. Be open, it's going to get out anyway, be very, very direct. Now, Bill said he was very easy to deal with, but I don't know whether Bill remembers this.
I didn't ask him much for that.
In the very early days of that first session, I think Bill was having a little bit of difficulty with the governor. And we were at Morgan one day at a cocktail party, and the waiter came around and asked us for drinks, and Bill ordered, I don't know, Chardonnay or whether he may have ordered something stronger than that. And I ordered a Chardonnay, and Brendan ordered a glass of white grape juice. And after the three of us, Brendan walked away, Bill leans over to me, he says, I know it. He said, you can't trust any Irishman who doesn't drink.
Al Bernstein, did you trust the Irishman who didn't drink?
Not any more than I would trust a Jew who didn't.
What is your take on the governor's style of leading and dealing with the legislature?
I think that the discussions we've heard so far are pretty accurate, and I can put it into perhaps anecdotal form because a couple of things that I was involved in. When Brendan's team first came in, and I didn't know any of them,
number like that who voted in favor of it, which was somewhat short of a majority. We voted the by that point. Because the Assembly, again, had adopted the gross income tax bill that Bill Hamilton had introduced and then strangled me into being a co-sponsor. The Senate's caucus Assembly leadership about the word that if we did a bill sufficient to fund education and comply with Robinson Cahill at the time, that he was going to, in effect, indicate the administration's position, and I assume the court to do what one of the dissenting opinions in the Robinson Cahill sequence had suggested, namely direct the state treasurer not to fund any of the schools except for those. So that threat, like hitting the donkey over the head with a mallet, all of a sudden this leadership, they said, you go over, Governor, please do not do that until we have the opportunity to for straight hours. Wanted me to talk to the governor. Legislature to act. They sent me over to try and speak to the Senate. At that point, now it gets really bad. I go over to where the Senate was meeting at the time, and I'm very pleased to say that one of the gentlemen who was involved in that, the day was massacred, took a stranglehold on me, who was then on staff for Joe Merlino, who said nobody ever gets into the Senate caucus except a senator. So we wrestled a little bit. In my weakened condition, I needed to splinter the kid at that time. But the message got through that we were serious about getting something done. And whatever role I played in my blundering way, we eventually did it.
The governor and his staff took a very tough line vis-a-vis the legislature, but is it because they had no choice if they wanted to get these really tough issues through? I mean, was there any other way to do it?
Well, you couldn't.
Any other way for the governor and the front office to do the income tax?
You couldn't sweep talk them into it. No, you couldn't do at that. Leadership, but kind of a thing that gave you a lot of options, and the
time with a package similar to the Bateman-Simon plan, and I would reject them, and it seemed like an easy way to get by that year. But we had to have a long-range solution, and all these guys were behind it. I was getting it through the Assembly.
Well, that's
Jim Floyd. Is Jim out? Oh, there he is.
There he is.
What
Yeah.
The only connotation I've seen was the subject of the.
It's the best way to be Canada.
Bring a little levity to a couple of things that happened so you can see the other side. I think it was 1978, and it was in June. It was the end of the session, and we had about 9 administration bills we wanted to get passed. The key one was the administrative law judge bill. And it was, I guess, in the middle of the afternoon when, at that time, Christy Jackman was the speaker. And he called me and said, "You got to come down and see me. We don't have more than 32 votes for the bill." Remember that, Al? And so I said, "All right, let's go down to caucus." Well, if you've ever been in a Democratic caucus in the Assembly, it's pretty wild. And so at one point I screamed about whether we had any more votes, and there weren't. So I went to see Jim Hurley, who was the Republican minority leader. And I asked Jim, I said, "How many votes do you have for the administrative law judge bill?" And he said, "None." I said, "Give me a bill you want." And so he said, "I'll be back to you in about 15 or 20 minutes. So he came back. I don't remember what the first 2 bills were. I said, "We can't do it." But the third bill was Marie Mueller's teacher certification bill. I said, "Okay, we'll do it, but here's how we're going to do it. We're going to put the administrative law judge bill up. We'll put our votes on the board. Then you put your votes on the board. We pass the bill. The speaker will go down to his seat, and he'll move your bill immediately, which will be a signal to all our people to jump on it." So after a long struggle, we got the 41 votes for the administrative law judge bill. Jackman went down to move the teacher certification bill, and I think it was Jimmy Saxton stood up and said, on a point of order, "I didn't agree to this, we're moving it back to committee." And that's what happened. And all summer, all the Republicans did was say how we beat them. They beat themselves. One other quick story, because I think it's kind of funny. It was one night when we were trying to pass the transit takeover bill, public service buses. And Jackman called me and he said, "We're not going to get this done tonight." So I said, "Let's have a dinner recess." And Harold and I took him to a little Italian restaurant in Pennsylvania, gave him 3 double Scotch sours. This is a true story. Took him back and said, "Just sit here and we'll get it done by 2 or 3 in the morning." And that's what happened. So there was a way to deal with some of this stuff in a little bit lighter way.
Bob, I just wanted to add one other similar anecdote to that. We had a bill, I think it may have been the budget bill, where we had 35 votes in caucus, but we had 7 people, 34 votes in caucus, but we had 7 members who had committed to deliver the 41st vote. So we got 34 and 7 is 41. That's simple arithmetic. So we post the bill, and it goes up on the board. 34 votes go up, and the speaker keeps the board open 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Finally, we call a recess. We go back in the caucus, and we say, "Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Dick Coffey is going to stand right next to the speaker. He's going to raise his arm, and as he drops his arm, 7 votes. And we did it.
We're talking about keeping the board open. We're trying to pass the commuter transportation tax at the end of 1977, I guess. And we knew we were going to have the votes, but there were some people at the shore that needed transportation, a couple of people in the hospital. So I was in the chair at the time. We called the bill, we put it up, and I think we had about 38 votes on it. And I kind of stepped back, sat around for about 5 minutes. We knew it was a long project. Finally, Jimmy Hurley came up there, and Jimmy Hurley was always a gentleman. He said, "Mr. Speaker, how long are you going to keep the board open?" I said, "Jim, we're going to keep it open as long as we need to. You know what I'm going to suggest you do? Why don't you guys go to lunch? I give you my word that when you come back, the same votes will be there. And when the others come in, we're going to pass this bill." That's what we did. He could have made a big scene. He could have got headlines the next day. He chose not to. We all went off to lunch and came back an hour and a half later. The board was throbbing. because it was on the whole time and the heat was there. And we finally got, I don't know, Paul Cantillo came in, and I think Arlena Miskevich came down from a hospital bed, and somebody else, Charlie Yates came in from Paris or someplace where we passed the bill.
So let me ask the governor, if you had it to do over, would you do it differently with regard to the legislature? Would you be more personable with them? Would you, cozy up to them more? Would you?
There's a line in the book, The Last Hurrah, where he's on his deathbed, and the bishop is there, and the cardinal is there, and the cardinal says, he's giving him the last rites, and he says, well, I know that if he had to do all over again, he would do it very, very differently. And Skeffington opens his eyes and says, the hell I would. The hell I would.
Answer.
Well, let me tell you one story I love to tell. That was the day we were talking about the legislature. A legislator comes in to see me. He says, you got to veto Assembly Bill 817. So I look at him and I said, Ozzy, that's your bill. You sponsored it. He says, yeah, but somebody read it to me. And you know who it was? Ozzy. Yeah. Ozzy. Yeah.
Brendan, can I tell you another Ozzy story? Yeah. We have. During those years, was the legislative leadership consulted on the policy initiatives of the Byrne administration? Were you in before those initiatives were decided on? Or were you informed, this is the governor's program and this is what's going to be?
I don't know that we were in on the birth, but they didn't spring any surprises on. We didn't read about it in the newspaper. We'd be told it was coming if it was an administration proposal. And especially by the second term, I think there was a great deal of mutual respect that had been developed by that time. With one story that I've never told in Brendan's presence. The first day of the 76-77 session, Joe LaFonte and I, the newly elected Speaker and Majority Leader, are called in. We had a nice conversation with Brendan. And he looks at us and he talked about the bill that people have referred to earlier today, the Model Penal Code. And it's true, he kicked around 2 or 3 sessions, couldn't go anywhere. And Brendan looked at us and said, I think it'd really be neat, and I think that was the word that he used. He said, if you introduce the penal code today, no reference, and you pass it on Thursday. And I looked at Joe, Joe looked at me, did you just hear what he said? And Joe said, I don't think we can do that. And his learning curve on that one was still working.
You people out there have had experience, you've been around, you've watched, you've been involved. Do you have any statements or quarrels? Yeah.
I just wonder, all these nice stories here, if you guys want to comment, how did you deal when you were hit with political corruption in your own party, not yourselves or your administration?
In our own organization, our own party, our own administration, we didn't have much. I remember one time there was.
I said that as a given.
Oh, okay.
How did you deal with it as trying to govern with this hitting your party and some of the people you needed most in politics?
Do you understand the question?
I don't think we dealt with it other than the fact that we stayed away from it because we weren't involved. And you're talking about Pete Williams, and you're talking about some of the other things. Well, look, you know, you can almost sense when there are problems with people in cities. I mean, I don't think any of us were naive about Arricchetti. We stayed away from him. We were very careful how we dealt with him because you just had that sense. I mean, I would never meet with Arricchetti alone. Never.
I remember one time I had to fire some guy from Hudson County just because the wrong people were supporting him. And I get a call one time from old Senator Bill Kelly from Hudson County. Yeah. And he says, Brendan, he says, if you fire this guy, I may come out against you. And I said, Bill, I said, you forgot. You were Democrats for Sandman 2 years ago. What's the difference?
That reminds me of a story, and it gets to your point. Tommy Smith and I forget who the other Hudson leader was. They had a prosecutor candidate. Wally Shield. They had a prosecutor candidate, and the governor called me and said, "You got to go down and tell him there's no way in hell that this guy is going to get appointed." And I did. And you can imagine what that conversation went like. But this gets to your point. There was never a tolerance of it, and it was expected. There was a conversation one day. The governor was upset with one of the directors who shall remain nameless, and he had the cabinet officer in and asked the cabinet officer why he shouldn't fire this person, and the cabinet officer said, well, he's honest. And the governor turned and said, that's a given, now tell me why I shouldn't fire him. And I mean, that's the kind of thing that went on in the closed-door sessions. And it's one of the things I think that we're all very proud about when I look around the room here and I see the people who were involved, because that was the standard that we had.
I'm Jerry English, and at the time I was what the program was going to be. Bob and Harold and I would meet with them, and Alan Handler had just come down as chief counsel to the governor. He sat in on those leadership meetings and our Monday morning, Tuesday morning operation where we want to be passed. Absolutely. And Alan Handler walked out of the room and said, "This is a wonderful job." I think this is the most wonderful job. You just tell these people what it is you want, and that's what they do. And I said, Alan, don't go home too early tonight. Bob well knows, and they didn't do one single thing that they said they were going to do. Conversation very good count.
Yes. Hi, Jeff Laurenti. Want to, if I can, just raise a couple of issues. First, I think it. Well, the fact is that the resentment level in the Senate, among the Senate members, for the notion that assembly leaders are going to come here and tell us what we need to do was very high, and they raged for the first couple times that ever happened and said never again. So yes, we had to keep Al out. But hey, in the end, all worked out. And we've loved you ever since, that's right. But one should remember that the quality of the legislature, believe it or not, and those who worked in these as assistant counsels that time had, as I think Al suggested, a reputation on the legislative side of being condescending towards them. The quality of the legislature then was much higher than what we have today in Trenton. And I think it's because of what Bob Mulcahy had said about a generation shaped by John F. Kennedy, whereas the current generation
is shaped by experience of Ronald Reagan and such, as defining what politics is about. So those were actually halcyon days in the legislature. It was a time of legislatures coming of age, investing and upgrading their capacities, so they were not quite the doormats that in prior administrations a legislature of the governor's party would be. And for the record, Bob, Lorenzo's didn't take credit cards in those days. Right, you had to sign. You had to sign. Sign a tab. The tensions within the Senate in that first term over the income tax were profound. Not only did you have tensions between the houses, much less vis-a-vis the governor, but you had, in the end, in July of 1974, 7 Democratic senators who would have been ready to go out and vote for the income tax. And Merlino had to make the pledge that I will not move this income tax bill again for the remainder of the session in order to prevent them from posting it and driving a stake through the heart of the demon, as they thought it was. So, and then it was a question of letting the others have their shot. Pat Dodd offered a state property tax bill that we then, jumped on to kill Jim Dugan, the so-called surtax income tax, and as the governor said, all of these had no way out, and in the end we had what ended up following session. Dan pointed out to me the memo, and this is a different dimension of the executive legislative relationship that's been blown up out there, that after several shouting matches with Senator Merlino in the State House corridors, I didn't drop in the Cartman nomination. And this question of the legislative, and the governor wrote at the bottom back to Dan, remember, you work for me, not Senator Merlino. I want that nomination in next time. But the question of not trading off jobs for legislation was a shock to the legislative culture, and it was very distinctive in the Byrne years. One huge institutional change that came out of this was the governor, all due respect, wouldn't sign our bills, wouldn't call for them. You will recall the constitutional provision that the governor has 10 days after a bill is presented to respond, and the legislature got in the habit of waiting till he called, and so he pocket vetoed dozens and dozens of bills in his first term, to the rage of the legislature. On our side, in the second term, we adopted a rule, we'll just deliver it to them if we feel like it. And there were times we set off panic in the governor's office when we delivered a batch of bills they weren't expecting. Then you had 10 days. And then Assemblyman Bernstein offered a constitutional amendment that deprived the legislature of its powers by giving a 45-day period, for which we all regret. Finally, the model penal code, I just want to have just one comic reminder of where it ended, and that was our beloved figure from suburban Camden County, Joe Maressa. Joe Maressa, who was very agitated that this bill had references to penetration per os or per annum, and week after week would raise these sodomy and all that, and this became the great morality tale and fable in the Senate, and many efforts after it was passed to try to remedy this terrible, terrible and immoral law. But that withstood the test of time. Thanks for your patience, by the way.
Alan, if I could just say a word with regard to the gubernatorial pocket veto bill that ACR, whatever the number was at the time.
To the Jeffrey, I've forgotten the complete details, but it was the term and pocket veto that the legislature did not have any control over. And Al would come in with this particular bill and say, oh, gee, I don't know whether we have time to get to it, and so forth and so on. And so then they introduced this resolution to amend the Constitution. And I was stunned to see that be passed the two houses in successive years. So I always said to my colleagues on the Supreme Court, do not depend on the New Jersey Constitution, because they can change it with 51% of the vote, and the public has no idea whatsoever what these constitutional amendments mean. So it's tough business. Okay.
Any other questions or comments or putting this in perspective, correcting some of the mistakes?
Right, my turn. Hi, I'm Greta Kiernan, former member of the Assembly and a former staffer of both houses working for leadership during that income tax, which was an exciting period in everybody's life that's in this room. I want a couple of things. First of all, I want to correct the record that I was not the running mate of Harold Martins, who didn't go along with what needed to be done. That was Herb Gladstone. He had two winning running mates. The other one was about the constitutional amendment that we did. I guess sometimes in politics, or as in life, a little personal pique comes into things that we decide to do that are the right things to do. I had a bill when I was in the legislature I used to call it Sunset on Regs. It was to allow regulations to come up every 5 years to be reviewed. Governor Byrne and his cohort over here, Dan O'Hearn, didn't want to see that one passed, and they had some good constitutional reasons why they didn't want to see that one signed. When it passed both houses, it ended up in the pocket, and I have a file which I'll have to give to Ron Becker on how that all went, including correspondence. Now, I'm no longer in the legislature, but that had nothing to do with my losing the election. But Al Burstein, whom I had worked for and with for many years, was still in the legislature, and he had a bill, which I believe had to do with financing of elections.
No, but had to do with political parties having the right
endorsements.
from endorsing
Yes.
or spending any money for candidates in the primary, which was ultimately in another state declared to be unconstitutional.
But anyway, we thought that we had some good ideas, and here is this outdated provision that allowed a governor to ignore the legislature as he or she is leaving office and just wait until the last minute when the bill would finally arrive. It would be too late for it to be signed. And we decided to do something about it. And it was one of the most fun times of my life, because I was a part-time staffer then, I think looking for work at that point. And we took 2 sessions of the legislature in 2 different sessions to get it past both houses. But when the people finally got it, they recognized that it was probably a good idea. And that really, I think, stems from my belief that I heard spoken about so much this morning, co-equal branches. That was a place where there was no co-equality between the branches, and I felt that we should at least take a look at how to fix it. And Dan Oren didn't agree with me, and I think that's the only thing we haven't agreed on in our entire lives. Thanks.
You guys in the Assembly never had the coglione just to send the bills over, because then the 10 days would have kicked in. The 10 days would have started kicking in, and somebody else occasionally did show those coglione and was able to create a huge stir in Dan's office.